Chapter 4042. The Crown Princess's medical skills were superb. She had single-handedly pulled the dying empress back from the gates of hell. No wonder she could tell at a glance that this girl's body was not well. If it got worse, she would develop epilepsy. Look, weren't her limbs already twitching uncontrollably? No one knew that Bao Zuiping was twitching in anger at the Crown Princess's poisonous tongue. Miss Mississippi, the three servant girls were terrified. They knelt by their miss's side and called her name repeatedly. Bao Zuiping could only pretend that she was slowly waking up. She groaned and slowly opened her eyes. At this time, the young Crown Princess and Princess Wushuang had already walked out hand in hand. Seeing this, the young master of the Changningho estate immediately shouted angrily, "Stop! Princess Wushuang, shouldn't you give an explanation for bullying a girl of my Changningho estate?" Princess Wushuang looked coldly at the young master and said coolly, "Fourth young Master Fu, what explanation do you want?" As she spoke, she unhurriedly untied the red soft whip from her waist. Without any explanation, she swung it in his direction. Startled, fourth young Master Fu hurriedly raised his arm to block. Unexpectedly, he was hit squarely by the red whip. "Are you satisfied with this explanation?" And Wushuang looked at her coldly. Her tone suddenly became stern. "If you are not satisfied, you can come with me to His Majesty to judge. I and Wushuang can even go to war. Why would I be afraid of a little Changningho playboy? I and Wushuang went to war when I was 13. I have guarded the borders for more than 6 years. I have participated in 103 wars, big and small. What explanation do I need to give you? What explanation do you want me to give you?" Her eyes were full of disdain and disdain. Once her aura rose, no one in the hall dared to speak. Not to mention a little playboy of the Changningho estate, even if there were court officials in front of her, they would have to bow their heads and respectfully call her Princess Wushuang. Hatred flashed through Bao Zuiping's eyes. She wiped her tears and sobbed quietly. "Princess, why did you have to be so harsh on cousin? Cousin didn't do anything to you." And Wushuang looked over coldly. There was a hint of a smile on her face, and a cold and sharp aura was emitted from her. Bao Zuiping hurriedly lowered her eyes, hiding the faint haze in her eyes. And Wushuang didn't say anything else. She held Arbor's hand and walked out of the Azure Flower restaurant together. "Sister-in-law, you can continue shopping with my brother. I'll go back first," Princess Wushuang said with a smile. Arbor knew that she must be in a bad mood after what happened just now. He nodded and said, "Okay." And Wushuang bid farewell and left. Not long after, Prince Mo returned with 2 bags of white sugar cakes. Not bad, not bad. Wushuang was quite sensible. She knew that she could not continue to stay here and disturb the young couple. She should have left tactfully. Arbor glanced at him and pulled him into the carriage. He couldn't help but ask curiously, "That cousin of the Changningho estate, Miss Bao, is Third Fu's fiancé?" "What fiancé?" The Crown Prince curled his lip in disdain. Third Fu's stepmother can't decide his marriage. Every family has its own difficulties. The Crown Prince held his wife's small hand and said in a low voice, "His stepmother doesn't have good intentions. She always wants to push her niece to Third Fu." Chapter 4043. That Miss Bao is Third Fu's stepmother's niece? The little Crown Princess looked curious and gossipy. The Crown Prince nodded disdainfully. Madame Nei Bao harbors evil intentions and thinks she can do whatever she wants in the Marquis Ning estate. What a joke. Then what's up with the engagement? The little Crown Princess asked curiously. I saw that Wushuang's attitude towards the people of the Marquis Ning estate is very cold. She probably also resents Third Fu. The engagement was arranged by Madame Nei Bao's wishful thinking, but she didn't go through any formalities. This matter has spread like wildfire in the capital. You mean that the step-madam is scheming against Third Fu? The Crown Prince nodded and pinched the little Crown Princess's cheek with a smile. Third Fu can handle it himself, so we don't need to worry too much about him. Third Fu has contributed greatly in suppressing the zombies in Li City this time. Royal Father will definitely reward him when the time comes. Speaking of which, the 3 provinces haven't been too peaceful recently. The little crown princess lifted her head and opened the bag to take out a small piece of white sugar cake. She put it in her mouth and took a bite. Say, should we go destroy their nests? Prince Emo couldn't help but want to laugh. He pulled his wifey's hand and said, Jojo, do you feel a bit idle? Don't tell me you forgot that the finals of the Heaven Primordial Roll will be held in 10 days. We'll have something to do then. The little crown princess nodded reluctantly and couldn't resist muttering to herself, I wonder if Duan-yu, that guy, will come at that time. Since he promised that he would appear, then he will definitely come. The next day, Third Young Master Fu led a group of generals into the capital and reported the situation of suppressing the zombies in Lee City. The emperor was overjoyed and conferred upon him the title of third-rank General Wooding and bestowed upon him a residence in the general's estate on Changle South Street. That afternoon, General Wooding's estate was blessed with 2 joyous events. His Majesty selected a matchmaker and bestowed a marriage between General Wooding and Princess Wushuang. The Crown Prince and the little Crown Princess were sitting in the Eastern Palace, eating snacks and gossiping. When the topic of the marriage came up, the 2 of them were enjoying it. Just wait and see. This matter is not over yet. The Crown Prince said with certainty. It would be strange if the Fu family could stop. This is a marriage arranged by His Majesty. Can the second lady of the Marquining Manor make a fuss and defy the decree? Heh. Mo Lien pinched his wife's small, round chin. There really are a lot of people with holes in their brains in this world. Xiao Yi suddenly jumped in and cupped his hands at the 2 of them. Your Highness, Crown Princess. The Fu family is really causing trouble at Third Young Master Fu's residence. When Prince Emo heard this, he immediately pulled his wife to her feet. Let's go, Jojo. I'll take you to watch the show. Arbor looked at him expressionlessly. Am I such a person who likes to watch the show? No. The Crown Prince immediately shook his head and said with a grin, It's your husband who likes to watch. Xiao Yi stood behind the 2 of them and rolled his eyes helplessly. His Highness the Crown Prince was usually a dignified and calm person, but in front of the Crown Princess, he didn't seem like a normal person. If His Highness had a tail behind him, it would definitely be wagging happily. Xiao Yi looked at the 2 of them with a strange expression. For some reason, he inexplicably associated his master with a cute pet. Mo Lien seemed to sense something and suddenly glanced at Xiao Yi. Chapter 40-44. The latter hurriedly adjusted his expression and bowed to his master with an incomparably sincere face. Master, this way please. No one knew what he was thinking in his heart. Mo Lien glanced at Xiao Yi and pulled his wife's small hand. The 2 of them quickly walked out. Wait! Arbor took out a transportation talisman array and waved it at his fingertips. Use this. Xiao Yi's eyes brightened. The great Crown Princess was indeed wise. Since they were going to watch the show, of course, the faster the better. It would save them the trouble and they could watch the entire show. Mo Lien inwardly pursed her lips in amusement. Who was the one who said that he wasn't interested in watching the show? The 3 of them instantly disappeared from the transportation talisman array. When they reappeared, they were already standing in an alley on Changle Street. They were about a few minutes away from the newly bestowed General Wooding's residence by the Emperor. Should we use an invisibility talisman? The little Crown Princess asked with a curious expression. Xiao Yi's mouth twitched. Where can't our Crown Prince go? Why use an invisibility talisman? It's not like we're going to sneak around. His Highness the Crown Prince immediately nodded. We're going to watch the show openly. Who can chase us out? The little Crown Princess silently put away her talisman and nodded. All right then, lead the way. Xiao Yi's mouth twitched. For some reason, he felt that the Crown Princess was actually very keen on watching the show. Don't be fooled by her expressionless face. Heh. There was already a trace of excitement in her tone. The 3 of them quickly ran to the entrance of General Wooding's residence. Coincidentally, they saw a carriage speeding to the entrance of the general's residence. Before the carriage came to a stop, they saw a figure dressed in red with a swoosh darting out of the carriage. There was a scarlet whip in his hand and he looked like he was about to pick a fight. The little Crown Princess hurriedly pulled His Highness the Crown Prince to hide under the eaves at the side. She poked her head out to look with a gloating expression. Third Fu acted first and reported later. He asked Imperial Father to approve the marriage. Wu Shuang came to the door with a whip. Wu Shuang, this lass, is merely a paper tiger. Don't be fooled by how she's all bark and no bite. She'll definitely wilt after being coaxed with a few words. Crown Prince Mo whispered into his daughter-in-law's ear. While they were talking, they saw a white figure stumbling out of the alley. With a sharp cry, she threw herself in front of Princess Wu Shuang. Princess, I beg you to show mercy. And Wu Shuang took a closer look and couldn't help but roll her eyes. Wasn't it Bao Zuiping, Bao Wu Shuang's daughter, who she had seen at the restaurant yesterday? Bao Zuiping was crying so hard that she looked like she was about to stop breathing. She sobbed and said, Your Highness, please be magnanimous and let Zuiping go. Please don't steal my husband from me, okay? You are noble, dignified, and beautiful. Why do you have to steal someone else's husband? I already have an engagement with my husband. Princess Wu Shuang was so angry that her face turned pale. She suddenly flung Bao Zuiping's hand away and said harshly, What nonsense are you talking about? Do you believe that I will whip your stinky mouth to death? The princess was so anxious that she burst out with vulgarities. Her eyes widened in anger and Bao Zuiping shrank back in fear. I want to steal your man? Princess Wu Shuang said angrily, What are you thinking? Can't you see that I am also here to ask about the situation? Get out of here immediately. Chapter 40-45. With a creaking sound, the door of General Wooding's residence suddenly opened to both sides. Third young Master Fu appeared in front of Wu Shuang in a flash. When Wu Shuang saw this guy, she was instantly enraged. She raised her whip and lashed it at his handsome face that didn't stop. I'll whip you to death, you little bastard. How dare you scheme against me? Tell me, did you say something in front of His Majesty? This imperial edict came as fast as lightning. She was just sitting at home, and disaster came from the heavens. The imperial edict hit her on the spot, and she was stunned on the spot. The most infuriating thing was that when she sent a message to her father happily replied with 2 lines of words. Congratulations, my daughter. His Majesty has finally done something serious and settled my daughter's marriage. I can also continue to guard the border with peace of mind. Third young Master Fu blinked and reached out to grab the tail of her whip. The fiery red whip immediately straightened. What are you doing? It's only been an hour and you want to kill your husband? Who is my husband? And Wu Shuang stuttered, her face red with anger. Shameless. What's there to be shameless about? Third young Master Fu pulled the whip and instantly pulled his wife from one end to the other. He reached out to hug her skillfully. And Wu Shuang kicked him in anger. Let go. I'll let go if you win. Shameless. Who's the shameless one? Could it be that you've forgotten that when we first met, the moment you jumped into my carriage, you stretched out your hand to tease me? Princess Wu Shuang was so angry that she was speechless. She glanced and saw several men and women with ugly expressions walking out of General Wooding's residence. The Marquis of Marquis Ning's residence and the second Madame Bao, were all present. Their expressions were ugly. Luckily, General Wooding's residence occupied a large area. The entrance was an empty piece of land. Other than the general's residence, there were no other residences nearby. Thus, the group of people made a ruckus at the entrance and did not attract much attention from outside the alley. Cousin. When Miss Bao saw third young Master Fu, she did not dare to call him husband so shamelessly in front of him. She looked at him plaintively, but he didn't even look at her. He only took the whip from his wife and rolled it up before throwing it into his inner world. Princess Wu Shuang was so angry that she struggled in his arms for a while, but she couldn't get out. She wanted to bite him to death. What are you trying to do? I haven't seen my wife for a long time. I want to give her a hug to relieve my longing. Third young Master Fu blinked and looked at her with an aggrieved expression. He mumbled, Shuang, I am injured. And Wu Shuang was slightly shocked. She quickly looked at him and asked subconsciously, Where are you hurt? With this fellow's cultivation, he shouldn't have been captured by a few corpse puppets, right? Third young master Fu teased his wife as if no one else was around. He reached out, grabbed her small hand and pressed it against his heart. And Wu Shuang's pretty face flushed red. She felt that the heart of the person under her was boiling like a fire. She immediately spat at him and said angrily, "Let go of me." Miss Bao fainted immediately. The maidservant beside her quickly reached out to catch her body and screamed, "Third young master, Miss Bao fainted." "Which day doesn't she faint?" Third young master Fu sneered. Chapter 4046. I'm not a doctor. You can't possibly give her a diagnosis, right? His tone was cold and indifferent as he said, "Why aren't you taking her to the medical hall to find a doctor? She probably has some hidden illness that makes her faint so easily." And Wu Shuang looked speechlessly at this sharp-tongued fellow. She struggled slightly but was unable to break free. Instead, she allowed him to hug her even tighter. You let go." Even Princess Wu Shuang, a female general who had been in the army for many years, couldn't help but blush. Third Fu's family was standing at the side watching. What was this? Third young master Fu looked at her with a faint smile. "I can let go, but you can't run away again." "When did I run away?" "Ha!" Third Fu loosened his embrace and grabbed An Wu Shuang's small hand. He pulled her into the mansion as if no one else was around. "Stop right there." Madame Bao stomped her feet in anger and couldn't help but scream, You're really all grown up now. You don't even need to listen to your parents anymore, do you?" "Father, women don't understand, but you don't understand either?" Third Fu looked at the ashen-faced Marquis Fu in amusement. "When we were inside just now, didn't I make myself clear enough? Madame Bao wants to control your son's marriage? She's not qualified." Marquis Fu's face was sullen. "Sintra, you're a man. You know that if a girl's reputation is ruined, it'll be hard for her to marry into a good family. The matter between you and Sui Ping, she can only blame herself." Third Fu sneered and said with a cold expression, "Or she can blame her own aunt. Nothing has happened yet, but she's already spreading rumors outside and causing a storm in the capital. It's as if I, Third Fu, have already married her. Where did she get the guts to do this? Doesn't she think she's funny?" Madame Bao was so angry that her entire body trembled. She was like her niece, her body swaying and almost falling. "Madam, don't tell me you want to faint too?" Third Fu laughed at the two of them. Unfilial son. Marquis Fu's old face flushed red. "Anyway, even if you can't disobey His Majesty's edict and insist on marrying Princess Wu Shuang, you can't let down your cousin's deep feelings. You must marry your cousin. At the very least, she must be a concubine." "Concubine? Wouldn't that be too unfair to my cousin?" Third young master Fu said with a smile. "It's good that you know." Madame Bao was furious. She curled her lips and shouted, "If you really know your mistake, it's not impossible to make your cousin a co-wife after 3 months of marriage." "Ha!" Third young master Fu hugged Princess Wu Shuang's slender waist and laughed wildly. "What are you laughing at?" Madame Bao flew into a rage out of embarrassment. "Madam, don't worry. Your Bao family status is noble. How can you let Miss Bao be a concubine?" Third young master Fu gave a strange smile. "Before I left the palace, I went to the Empress to ask for a decree. I will bestow a marriage between fourth brother and cousin. The two of them will love each other dearly and will be together forever. Oh, counting the time, the Empress's decree should be reaching Markening's estate soon. Why aren't the two of you going back to receive the decree? It's not good to keep the eunuch delivering the decree waiting for a long time." Madame Bao turned pale with fright. She pointed at third young master Fu and screamed in a trembling voice, "You!" She immediately spat out a mouthful of blood and fainted on the spot. Arbor looked speechlessly at Emolien. Brothers are indeed the same kind of people. What a scam. See you tomorrow. Chapter 4047. Apparently, this Madame Bao vomited blood again after returning home. Her entire body was slanted on the bed and she couldn't get up at all. During dinner, Saichi vividly recounted the information she heard. Mother really issued a decree for their family? Saichi nodded. It's true. She betrothed fourth young master and Miss Cousin to Marketing Estate's fourth young master. That fourth young master is Madame Bao's biological son. These past 2 years, Madame Bao has been picking all over the place, wanting to find a rich young miss from a wealthy family to match her son. Unexpectedly, Saichi couldn't resist covering her mouth in amusement. Xiao Mu blinked before setting down the ladle and commenting with a nod, "That's not bad either." That day at Blue and White Flower Restaurant, fourth young Master Fu and this cousin of his seemed to be in love with each other. But Madame Bao definitely won't be satisfied. Saichi pursed her lips and said with a smile, "Madame Bao wholeheartedly wants her son to climb up the social ladder. How could she possibly hope for her son to marry her niece? The Bao family simply doesn't rank high in the imperial capital. In the end, it's just a small family. Who told her to want to trick others?" Arbor humphed. In the end, she tricked herself. Since Mother Queen had decreed the marriage, Madame Bao could only swallow her broken teeth and blood. No matter how much she looked down on her niece, she could only let her own son marry someone else. Those who harmed others would end up harming themselves. She completely brought this upon herself. Arbor's hand paused, and she looked up at the venerable Peach Blossom Immortal who had suddenly appeared beside her. The latter smiled at her the moment he came out and tossed a palm-sized stone in his hand. "Jojo, look, we found a sacred meridian on Peak Planet." Arbor's eyes lit up, and she reached out to take the stone from his hand. "Chirp, chirp," the little girl called out. The little white squirrel immediately flashed out and reached out 2 small paws to hold the stone. It peeled off the outer layer of the stone like peeling a banana, revealing a fist-sized pure gold sacred stone inside. A powerful energy wave rapidly circulated within this tiny sacred stone. The little fellow held it in her hand and stared at it without blinking. Looking up at the grinning venerable Peach Blossom Immortal, the little stoic blinked and asked, "It's useful?" "Of course." The venerable Peach Blossom Immortal raised his hand and took the holy stone from her. "This small piece of holy stone is enough for me to absorb for about an hour. Then let's mine it." The venerable Peach Blossom Immortal nodded with a smile. When Dao Wuji and the rest saw this holy stone, their eyes lit up. Needless to say, they were naturally willing to do the hard work. Arbor nodded in response. The venerable Peach Blossom Immortal said, "That guy isn't back yet." As soon as he finished speaking, he heard Emolien's voice from outside the door. "What do you want?" The little stoic ran to the door. When she looked up, she saw Emolien striding through the door and reaching out to pull her over. The venerable Peach Blossom Immortal rolled his eyes. "Since you're back, let's go." "Where are we going?" Emolien and Arbor asked in unison. In a flash, the venerable Peach Blossom Immortal appeared in front of Arbor. "Jojo, have you forgotten? The people from the Pure Heaven sect that we met in the Phoenix Forest. Their stronghold in the Divine Province is located on the outskirts of Dragon Flame City." Realization dawned on Arbor and he nodded his small head. Recently, he had been running between the academy and the capital, wholeheartedly searching for Cerberus blood for Murong Sun, so he had forgotten about this important matter. This was indeed an important matter. Chapter 40-48. When he met Emolien's slightly puzzled phoenix eyes, Arbor pulled her aside and whispered something to her. He recounted to Emolien how he encountered the Clear Sky Sect's disciples with the knife-scarred man and his group in Phoenix Woods. When he mentioned how those people besieged her and were ultimately killed by them, Emolien's eyes also darkened. The Clear Sky Sect's people haven't died out yet? The faction behind the Clear Sky Sect resembles Tianyun but also doesn't. Their Clear Sky Sect's several operations don't seem to have much connection with Tianyun. This Clear Sky Sect's favorite thing to do seemed to be besieging and killing the little stoic. She was well aware that the person behind this sect was definitely that old rival who had been plotting against her from the lower star domain to the upper 3 provinces and from her previous life to this life. "Say, do you think they've all moved away from their base in the capital's suburbs because the assassination mission in Phoenix Woods failed?" The little stoic asked gravely. The venerable Peach Blossom Immortal shook his head and said sarcastically, "I think they'll beat you at your own game and trick you again." The little fellow was smart and understood almost immediately. His eyes narrowed like cold lightning, and his voice was frosty. Will that be the case? Emolien also nodded slightly. It should be. The three of them looked at each other with tacit understanding and then nodded, preparing to set out for the capital's suburbs under the cover of the night. The little stoic glanced at the crown prince. Did royal father call you to the study because of Third Fu's incident today? Prince Emo shook his head. No, something happened with the state preceptor. The little stoic involuntarily pursed her lips. She never had a good impression of this Sir State Preceptor. In reality, although this Sir State Preceptor didn't do anything on the surface, he gave off a strange feeling. He seemed like a friend yet also an enemy, and he was very reserved. The Stoic boasted that she was quite intelligent, but she had never understood this person from beginning to end. Emolien followed her outside and said helplessly, "This matter is related to you." Arbor raised his eyebrows. The Imperial Advisor has been detained by the Sea of Forgetfulness's Long family, Emolien said helplessly. He sent a message to Imperial Father. The Sea of Forgetfulness's Long family wants to see you. Arbor was silent for a while. We'll see. Emolien and the Venerable Peach Blossom Immortal looked at each other. At the same time, they saw a trace of icy coldness in the little fellow's eyes. Yes, it was indifference. When the Sea of Forgetfulness's Long family was mentioned, the little fellow's heart didn't stir too much. His expression was so indifferent that it made one feel a bit of heartache. "Jojo," Arbor said coldly, "my mother is no longer here. That foolish woman who was willing to sacrifice her happiness for the family is already dead. I'm not her." Her voice was cold and indifferent. At least for now, she wasn't mentally prepared to meet the Long family. What's more, what does the Long family detain the state preceptor have to do with her? Was she in Arbor the kind of girl who would come and go as she pleased? Detain the state preceptor and have her rush over? She would rush over? What a joke. Who was the state preceptor to her? She wasn't the kind of kind-hearted Virgin Mary who would immediately feel compassion for any cat or dog that was in danger. She silently turned around and walked outside. Emolien and the Venerable Peach Blossom Immortal didn't say anything else and followed her outside. Halfway there, the two of them looked at each other again. Chapter 40-49. It seemed that Jojo harbored some resentment toward the Long family. But it made sense. That family in the Sea of Forgetfulness, for the sake of this illusory promise of 300 years of marriage, they had really ruined their daughter's lifetime happiness. According to Jojo's protective nature, she would definitely not like the Long family too much. Frankly speaking, the reason why he had repeatedly saved those mare people was because he had promised Senior Xuanji that he would take care of those weak mare people. Apart from that, Jojo and the Long family really did not have much of a relationship. The three of them left the Eastern Palace under the cover of night and headed toward the outskirts of the capital. Because they could not confirm the exact location for the time being, they did not use transportation talismans to teleport over. When they arrived near the outskirts of the capital, the Venerable Peach Blossom Immortal pondered for a moment before leading them southwest. It was already late at night. On a small hill in the outskirts of the capital, summer cicadas chirped one after another. Xiao Mu, Emolien, and Jichen stopped at the entrance to an inconspicuous farmhouse's small courtyard at breakneck speed. Arbor looked at He Shurchen meaningfully. The latter nodded slightly at her. According to the results of the soul-searching last time, the Clear Sky Sect's stronghold near the outskirts of the capital is here. An ordinary, inconspicuous farmhouse hidden among the large farmhouses in the outskirts of the capital was indeed well hidden. Arbor's fingers moved slightly. She casually sucked a piece of gravel from the ground into her palm and shot it out with a flick of her finger. Buzz! An inverted bowl-shaped defensive barrier appeared above the farmhouse that had been ambushed by an external force. In the sky above the originally quiet farmyard, a few dark figures also appeared. A hint of a smile appeared in He Shurchen's eyes. "You've come quickly." "Or you?" The other party shouted sternly. "Why bother with the pretense?" Arbor said indifferently. "You've been setting up defenses here for more than a day or two. You've been waiting for us for a long time, haven't you?" These people probably did not expect that it would take her so long to find their stronghold after returning to the capital. Ever since she left the Phoenix Forest, she had to run back and forth to the royal school, which took her more than half a month. Such a strange thing shouldn't be within the other party's control. They had probably been waiting for so long that they were getting impatient. The man in black was obviously stunned by Arbor's attitude. It was clear that Arbor and the other two knew that this was a trap, but they still came. How bold! Arbor turned to look at him. Emolien nodded. At the same time, she leaped into the air with Ichen. Together, they set up an even sturdier square-shaped defensive barrier around the farmhouse's courtyard. Arbor's lips curled into a sneer. He casually took out 2 divine power beads from his inner world and threw them over without saying a word. Boom! 2 loud sounds rang out. All sound was naturally blocked by the defensive wall. It was still a warm and beautiful night. The nearby farms and cottages did not know that a large-scale battle was taking place here. The men in black who were suddenly attacked by the divine power beads hurriedly scattered in all directions in shock. But it was too late. The divine power beads tore a huge hole in the defensive barrier they had set up. The huge impact seeped in through the hole and sent a few people flying several feet away. Poo-pew! The men in black were injured and vomited blood at the same time. Chapter 40-50. The look in his eyes changed abruptly, and then he turned around and ran toward the inner yard. Naturally, such a small manor wouldn't be too big. Xiao Mu waved her hand, and countless sand scorpions blotted out the sky as they swarmed toward this small manor to outflank it. Their movement speed was very fast, so fast that one could only see them clearly. They were black balls. It was as if a black wave had rushed into the courtyard and submerged the backyard in an instant. From time to time, there were screams of horror coming from the yard. The hundreds of men in black in the inner yard were now surrounded by a large group of black scorpions like caged birds. The archers who were hiding on the rooftops were also in a state of confusion. They had been waiting here for a long time and did not expect to see a large group of black scorpions. Bang! The giant sand scorpion king appeared in the group of scorpions. The archers were refreshed. They could not deal with the sea of black scorpions below, but at least the giant sand scorpion king could be everyone's target. Didn't they say that to catch bandits, first catch the king? Maybe after they finished off the sand scorpion king, they could make the group of scorpions retreat. Thinking of this, the archers shot arrows at the sand scorpion king below. The arrows were all knocked down by the sand scorpion king's 2 huge iron pincers. The archers were secretly shocked. At this moment, one of them suddenly let out a miserable scream. The leader, who was about to scold the man to shut up, looked back and was almost scared out of his wits. A ball of flame suddenly burst out of the man's chest and enveloped his entire body in an instant. The man screamed in pain, and the flame on his body seemed to spread. Someone was so anxious that without thinking, he was kicked off the roof and fell into the sea of scorpions. In minutes, he was gnawed until not even a bone was left. Everyone was scared out of their wits, and their faces suddenly changed unpredictably. At the same time, strange flames kept coming out of people's bodies, and they were also kicked off the roof and fed to the scorpions. It's mosquitoes! Mosquitoes! One of the men finally noticed the anomaly and screamed out. Under the night sky, mosquitoes that were smaller than fingernails naturally wouldn't catch anyone's attention at first. But when they saw the real strength of the fiery evil mosquitoes, no one dared to underestimate them. This was a group of things that could kill without spilling blood. Watch out for these strange mosquitoes. Just as an archer let out a cry, he saw a ball of fire burrowing out of his chest. Everyone looked at him in horror. Even the vice captain was affected. How strange these mosquitoes were. The archers on the roof were too busy to shoot arrows at the sand scorpion king. There was a large group of sand scorpions below, so they were invincible as they surged towards the black-clothed man like a tide. Anyone who was dragged into the group of sand scorpions, no matter who they were, could not escape the fate of being gnawed into dregs. Xiao Mu's eyes were frosty as she stared at the utterly defeated men in black who were doing their best to slaughter the sand scorpions, and a cold sneer flitted across her eyes. Trap? Did they want to trap her? In the face of absolute strength, any trap was useless. It would only accelerate their exposure and send them to hell. Arbor's eyes were cold and indifferent. He raised a luminous pearl. Chapter 4051. The luminous pearl's gentle and warm light instantly illuminated the pitch-black sea of sand scorpions below. It also made the black-clothed men who were struggling against the sand scorpions in a flurry of motion to look over with slightly distorted hands. They saw the little girl hovering in the air above this small farmhouse's courtyard. Her expression was apathetic and aloof as usual, and her pair of bright almond-shaped eyes appeared especially sharp and bright in the night. One of them couldn't resist bellowing at Arbor, "You knew long ago that there was a trap here, you did it on purpose." A vine whip slid in front of that black-clothed man and slapped his face. That person steadied himself with great difficulty and hacked at several sand scorpions around him before attempting to leap into the air again. Damn it! It was this feeling of being controlled again. His entire body felt heavy, as if he was being controlled by someone endlessly, and he couldn't float at all. He wanted to float as he pleased inside the defensive barrier set up by Mo Lien and Ma Shurchen. He was truly incomparably naive. After failing to float, that person panted loudly and sternly said to his black-clothed subordinates, "Don't panic, gather." When he turned his head to look halfway through, his face instantly contorted fiercely. There wasn't a single person around. Other than the black scorpions that blotted out the sky and covered the earth beneath his feet, there wasn't even half a ghost. His subordinates had all died in the swarm of black scorpions. Looking at the spreading scorpions beneath his feet, that person closed his eyes and instantly felt that the situation was hopeless. His long saber fell into the swarm of black scorpions with a bang. His entire body expanded in a split second, and he swiftly charged in Arbor's direction at a terrifying speed. Even if he died, he had to drag someone down with him. Arbor's bone-chilling gaze stared at the person in front of him, and a faint sneer appeared on his lips. A mantis trying to stop a chariot? How dare you compete with the sun and moon for glory? The little stoic coldly said this and abruptly drew the thunderclap sword from her conscience. The sword streaked across the sky and slashed horizontally in that person's direction at lightning speed. It was as if a hole had been torn open in the void, and the air in this area twisted slightly. The sky was shattered and the night was silent. The man who was being oppressed by the second move of the Nine Heavens Thunder Sword art, 1,000 Lightning Phantoms, looked at the dark clouds in the sky in horror. He could only watch as the thousands of lightning bolts transformed into sword shadows, carrying traces of the power of thunder and lightning as they swooped down from the sky. Boom, boom, boom. She poured all her emotions into this unlucky guy. Before he could successfully self-destruct, his entire body was crushed to pieces by the 1,000 lightning phantasm. His entire body dissipated between heaven and earth. Arbor looked coldly at the scene in front of him. He lowered his head to look at the long sword in his hand that was surrounded by lightning. He slowly turned around and looked at the remaining 3 archers on the roof. The latter had long been scared out of his wits. After a few clanking sounds, the 3 of them threw down their weapons and surrendered with pale faces. At the same time, countless rupturing birds flew in front of them and surrounded them. The 3 archers looked at Arbor in horror as if they were looking at the messengers from hell. In a quarter of an hour, only the 3 of them remained out of more than 500 elite disciples of the Clear Sky sect. What kind of terrifying battle prowess was this? Master completely underestimated this little girl in front of them. She actually tamed so many poisonous insects and creatures. It was simply unimaginable. In the current situation, there was simply nowhere to run. They didn't seem to have any other choice other than to obediently surrender. Chapter 4052. Arbor put away her long sword and hugged the little white squirrel that had jumped into her arms. She slowly walked in front of the 3 archers and looked at them expressionlessly. "What other trump cards do you have? Take them all out at once." They had waited for her for so long in this commoner's little farmhouse courtyard. She didn't believe that these people didn't have a backup plan. Without a backup plan, it didn't seem like a trap set up by her old rival. Once this person made a move, it was very fierce. And after several exchanges, this person should have known long ago that with his abilities, these mere 500 people couldn't do anything to her. He shouldn't have done such a stupid and pointless thing. Mo Lien and Hu Shurchen had already searched the entire courtyard. At this time, they came out and shook their heads at her, indicating that they didn't find anything. Two of the archers suddenly howled and were pulled over by a suction force in the air, landing in Hu Shurchen and Mo Lien's hands respectively. Arbor looked expressionlessly at the last archer standing in front of her and asked in a cold and calm voice, "Still not willing to speak? What do you want me to say?" That person couldn't stop trembling, clearly scared to the point of fainting. His gaze involuntarily drifted towards his two companions. At this time, their souls had already been searched. They sat on the ground like idiots with silly smiles on their faces. With this look, the hairs on this person's body stood on end and he couldn't stop trembling. A soul search was definitely the torture that every cultivator was most unwilling to experience. That person instinctively took a few steps back, his gaze turning from terror to calmness. Immediately after, a faint trace of madness appeared in his eyes. "You won't know how Master will deal with you next." His face started to twist crazily. "Even if you know how to tame beasts and kill all of us here, you won't be able to escape this inescapable net." Arbor's expressionless appearance seemed to provoke the man in front of her. He shouted harshly, "Why aren't you afraid?" Just now, he had been scared half to death because of those poisonous insects and scorpions. He felt that before he died, if he could see the stoic face in front of him reveal a terrified and uneasy expression, then he would truly be able to die in peace. Arbor's face was cold as he looked at Qin Lai and said, "Are you talking about these seal arrays?" Arbor pointed at the crisscrossing confinement rune arrays that suddenly appeared above his head. A hint of mockery flashed in her eyes. "If that's all you have?" Arbor glanced at him indifferently. "Then you really can't deal with me." "Ha ha." That man suddenly laughed crazily. He took out a jade talisman from his bosom and shouted, "What do you know? This farmhouse is surrounded by our people. We just need to wait for someone to send out the signal. Everyone would perish together." "Ha!" he yelled. Then he looked at the little white squirrel that flew in front of him like lightning and snatched the jade talisman from his hand. It then jumped onto Arbor's shoulder. That person stood dumbfounded in shock. Suddenly, he yelled at the top of his lungs, "Shoot!" When a loud rumble sounded, Arbor raised her hand and created a gust of wind that pulled everyone and all the little beasts into Paradise Planet at an incredible speed. At the same time, the defensive wall that Mo Lien and Qin Lai had set up outside suddenly collapsed. Countless divine stones were concentrated here by the bombardment. Chapter 4053. The skyrocketing tremors alarmed all the residents in the suburbs of the imperial capital. All the farmers in the village were in an uproar. The lights in every house were lit up. People put on their clothes and looked out of the windows. They saw flames soaring into the sky from the southeast. It was like a fire tornado. Smoke filled the air. Hearing the earth-shattering sounds of battle, the villagers were so frightened that they kept quiet out of fear. None of them dared to go out and look. They all shrunk back into their blankets, trembling in fear. Xiao Yi led several hundred Night Pavilion disciples and surged out from behind the divine stone cannons. They cut down anyone they saw as if they were chopping vegetables and melons, immediately killing the cannoneers who were caught off guard. There were a total of 12 divine stone cannons, all of which were aimed in the direction of the small farmhouse. After the sound of the cannons, the originally fine farmhouse had been razed to the ground. The people who fired the cannons and the guards totaled more than 300 people. They were all surrounded by the Night Pavilion disciples. Student Xiao Yi took the lead and slashed fiercely, directly cutting off one of the arms of one of the cannoneers. With a slap, he slapped him and his weapon to the ground. The Night Pavilion disciples swarmed forward and not only snatched the 12 divine stone cannons, they also chopped down all the black-clothed men who could. The remaining black-clothed men wanted to flee when they saw that the situation wasn't right, but they were also surrounded by a group of armored cavalry. Fong Su rushed over with 5,000 elite Greenwood guards. The crowd spread out and blocked off the black-clothed men's escape route. Without any explanation, they surrounded the Clear Sky sect disciples who were desperately trying to escape. From the beginning of the battle to the end, all the Clear Sky sect disciples were captured and pushed to the center of the encirclement with missing arms and legs. The horses neighed as the red-hot torches were ignited in the whistling night wind. In the pitch-black night, the torches formed a long, continuous dragon that was reflected on the windows of every house. All villagers, listen up. His Highness the Crown Prince is leading the troops to suppress the bandits. Don't be afraid and don't leave your houses for the time being. The bandits have been completely wiped out by us Greenwood guards. You won't be in any danger, Fong Su shouted loudly, his voice reaching all the villages in the suburbs. The commoners, who had been scared half to death, immediately let out a sigh of relief when they heard that the Crown Prince had come to suppress the bandits. Some of the braver ones couldn't help but lean against the window and look out, only to see that under the pitch-black night sky, there was a continuous stream of torches, and the shadows of the crowd were flickering in the wind. When Arbor's figure reappeared in the ruins of the farmhouse, Xiao Yi, who had been waiting for a long time, immediately came forward to greet him. Emo Lien also walked over unhurriedly. When he saw the residence that was filled with devastation, his lips hooked up in an extremely cold sneer. No wonder Jojo was so cautious. Her old rival really knew how to set up a series of traps. Her strategy was different from ordinary people. If someone else were here today, they would definitely be killed by the 12 cannons if they were caught like a turtle in a jar in the confinement rune array. Even if he used all his defensive spiritual artifacts to resist, even if he didn't die, he would still be severely injured. Your Highness, our brothers are waiting outside. Xiao Yi stepped forward and reported, all the Clear Sky sect disciples present are under control. Very good. Emo Lien nodded lightly and swept her gaze around in satisfaction. At this time, the Clear Sky sect archer in Jian Shurchen's hand was already trembling from head to toe. His entire body was covered in blood, and he looked battered and exhausted. Chapter 4054. Spirit, Spirit, Spirit. A spirit domain. A portable spirit domain. The archer's eyes were about to pop out of their sockets. In a moment of desperation, Arbor had dragged him in as well. His other two companions, who had already become idiots, had already been turned into minced meat by the Godstone cannons. This person's expression was terrified. Just by looking at his expression, one could tell how shocked, anxious, and terrified he was right now. This little crown princess actually had a portable spirit domain. No wonder so many Godstone cannons had no effect on her at all. No matter how powerful the Godstone cannons were, what use were they if they hit an empty target? They were completely useless, okay? The man took a deep breath. His mind spun rapidly as he thought about how to leak this news. Damn it. No wonder Master had schemed to deal with her so many times but had never succeeded. This time, almost all the remaining forces of the Clear Sky sect had been gathered to launch the last fierce attack. However, they still failed. It wasn't that they were too weak, but that the other party was too strong. The other party actually had a portable spirit domain. No wonder she could summon so many sand scorpions and so many poisonous mosquitoes and birds. Don't kill me. I can tell you that Master has another stronghold here. This person trembled all over and hurriedly said, Do you think I will believe you? Arbor looked at him coldly. She was looking at a corpse. Those who knew about the fact that she had a spirit domain with her were all her own people, or dead people who couldn't speak. As soon as he finished speaking, Hu Shurchen pressed down on his head without saying a word and searched his soul as usual. Then, with a wave of his finger, countless wooden thorns with barbs pierced into the man's body and twisted him into pieces. Xiao Yi secretly complained about how cruel it was. Lord Celestial Venerable had destroyed the person to the point that not even a trace of blood could be seen. It was truly an elegant and high-end technique. Let's go. Hu Shurchen turned around and nodded at the two. She led them out of the ruins and walked directly into the village. Bang! She kicked open a small courtyard door. Shichen strode inside, and Xiao Mu and Emo Lien followed behind him. Behind them, Xiao Yi and Fong Su also led their people inside noisily. The small courtyard was immediately filled with people. He-Chen led the group to a small backyard and pointed at the old willow tree in the corner of the yard. "Dig it up." Everyone swung their hoes with a series of banging sounds. A secret passageway appeared under the tree. Yuan Shurchen sighed and turned to Arbor. "It's best not to have too much hope. This enemy is very smart. It seems that there won't be anyone too stupid among his subordinates. This place is surrounded by our men. The other party should have guessed that their whereabouts would be exposed tonight. Since he can't escape, he will probably, once I die, I'll end my life with my secrets." As soon as Ji-Chen finished speaking, everyone rushed into the cellar in front of them and saw a lifeless woman lying on the edge of a wooden table. Arbor curled his lips and revealed a strange expression. He walked forward and grabbed the woman's hair to make her look up. There were countless poisonous insects on the old woman's face. Her nose, eyes, and mouth had been completely gnawed away by the poisonous insects. She looked extremely disgusting and terrifying. "You are indeed not an ordinary person to be so ruthless to yourself," Arbor said coldly without changing his expression. A soul-summoning talisman lit up on his fingertips. His eyes were deep and cold. Is death useful? Chapter 4055. As expected, this woman was extremely scheming. She knew that if those Clear Sky sect disciples were captured, one of them would definitely be forced to search their soul and expose her origins. At this time, the Crown Prince's troops had already surrounded the outside. If she rushed out, she would only expose her own identity. Thus, this woman went all out and swallowed poisonous insects and poisons, allowing these things to ruin her entire face. As a result, it was naturally impossible for others to easily recognize her identity. However, she didn't expect that in this world, there was a kind of almighty talisman master who could communicate with the power of heaven and earth and casually capture half of a person's soul after death. Of course, this method was very bad, because if an ordinary person died, their soul would definitely dissipate within 7 days. If her soul was forcefully extracted, it would definitely suffer the torment of being fried in boiling oil. After that, she would have to suffer the pain of her soul not dissipating for several days. The torment and pain of the soul was definitely not something a person's physical body could experience. Arbor wouldn't easily use this kind of talisman. However, this woman in front of her had a great enmity with her, so she couldn't be bothered to care whether she was dead or alive, whether she was in pain or suffering. The young crown princess raised a jade slip with her fingertips. With a flicker of light, a streak of light burrowed into the woman's blackened body. In a flash, an indistinct figure with an indistinct appearance floated up from the old woman's blackened body. At first, it was enveloped by a light barrier and looked around in confusion. When it saw Arbor and the other two standing in front of it, the soul involuntarily retreated. Arbor looked at her indistinct figure with an incomparably cold gaze and asked in a low voice, "Speak. Who are you, and who is your master?" As soon as she finished speaking, a cluster of ice crystals suddenly jumped out of her fingers and turned into long ice needles. Arbor flipped her hand and pointed the needles at the woman's soul, emitting a faint silver light. Without waiting for the soul to speak, she flicked her finger, and dozens of long needles shot out with a whoosh. Ding 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 ding. The long needles pierced through the body of the soul and directly nailed the dozen or so soft snakes that had crawled down the walls of the cellar to the ground. "How dare you show off your petty tricks in front of this crown princess?" Arbor coldly glanced at the woman's soul and raised another piece of jade. "Normal practitioners are ineffective against soul attacks, but that doesn't mean I can't do anything to you," Arbor said coldly. "If you don't answer me properly, I will keep your soul body captive and make you suffer the pain of thousands of arrows piercing your heart and lightning strikes for the rest of your life. Don't worry. As long as I want to, I can preserve your soul forever without any problems." Mo Lien and Yuan Shurchen could clearly see that the woman's soul trembled a few times as if she had received a shock. Of course, she was afraid. He felt an enormous fear towards the dark future. "Now I'll let you suffer." Arbor waved his hand coldly. The talisman transformed into the power of thousands of arrows that pierced through the soul body's limbs and bones. Prince Mo and the venerable Peach Blossom Immortal really didn't expect that a soul body could let out such a tearing scream. The woman's originally indistinct figure flickered slightly like a candle flame. Her entire body curled up into a ball in pain and fell to the ground, holding her head and trembling. Chapter 4056. Arbor raised another talisman jade slip and coldly looked at the woman in front of him without any emotion in his eyes. That extremely cold gaze fell into the eyes of a soul body. It was so cold that it was like a ghost that had walked out of hell. This little stoic girl was simply more like a ghost than a ghost. The soul trembled and watched as she raised her finger, seemingly about to activate another talisman attack. The woman shrieked in terror, "Talisman Master! Great Talisman Master!" Did Master know what kind of existence she had been chasing after all these years? "You're right." Arbor looked at her indifferently and unhurriedly nodded. "I am indeed a great Talisman Master. I can make your soul beg for death." The woman trembled in terror and buried her head in her body. She curled up and raised her hands, swaying repeatedly. Don't attack me." Arbor's fingertip moved, and amidst the woman's shriek, a beam of talisman power passed through her body. The woman, who originally thought she would suffer the sin of having her heart pierced by 10,000 arrows, suddenly felt as if her entire body was warm, as if she was basking in the faint sunlight she hadn't seen in a long time. After the talisman power of the restoration talisman was injected, the transparent soul's pained expression receded slightly, and she felt a bit better. "Don't worry," Arbor said coldly. "I said I wouldn't let you die like this." Another jade talisman appeared in her hand, and the power of a lightning talisman could faintly be seen slowly moving within. Lightning guiding talisman. The old woman's body contorted, and she hastily knelt down and kowtowed. "Spare me, spare me! Spare me, Crown Princess, spare me!" "For you?" Arbor asked with a chilly expression. I am Madame Long's personal servant," the old woman said while trembling. "Xiao Xiao's surname is Wang. Everyone calls me Mammy Wang." "Which Madame Long?" "Yes, Madame Long Shoshin of the imperial capital's Long family's branch family." Arbor looked at her expressionlessly. After a while, he suddenly flung the lightning strike talisman in his hand, which attracted a bolt of heavenly lightning that exploded on the old woman's left hand. The sizzling power of the thunder curse spread through her soul. It was so painful that she almost doubted her life. It was too painful. It was really too painful. That kind of painful feeling was really indescribable. Arbor glanced at her and continued, "Are you still unwilling to tell the truth? If the dictum talisman could be used on souls as well, it wouldn't be so troublesome now." Mo Lien walked to her side and took her little hand. She glanced at the woman indifferently. "Do you think it's fine to push all the blame onto the Long family? The branch of the Long family can be considered to have escaped from the divine prefecture, but if we really want to capture them, it won't be that troublesome. It was just that there was no need for that at the moment." The soul trembled again, and then said in a weak voice, I'll tell you everything. I'm begging the Crown Princess to give me a quick death. I only know that the person who has been contacting me is an old nanny surnamed Zhang. She really is the old nanny by Madame Long's side. If you don't believe me, you can check it out. Her surname is Zhang, and her name is Zhang Huilan. You're very generous. You gave me spirit coins to do something. The woman with the surname Wang screamed when she saw Arbor raise his hand. Chapter 4057. He curled up on the ground and kowtowed repeatedly. The woman hurriedly poured out everything she knew like beans from a bamboo tube. It's really Your Highness the Crown Prince, Crown Princess. This old servant is telling the truth. She hurriedly said, "A while ago, this Granny Zhang even came to find me and gave me a large sum of money to do something at the Kaidai Pavilion." Arbor's eyes narrowed slightly, and he looked at her coldly. "Speak clearly." The old woman hurriedly explained everything from beginning to end. It turned out that it was this old woman who had worn the Zhang Fua mask, disguised as a man, and instigated the Zhang family to carry their second son's corpse to the Kaidai Pavilion to cause trouble. Arbor sneered. Then you were also the one who poisoned the 8 members of the Zhang family to death in prison? The old woman immediately shook her head in fright. No, no, Crown Princess, this old servant didn't do it. This old servant only accepted Zhang Huilan's mission and went to find the Zhang family's old madam. I told them about this matter and gave them a sum of money. Apart from that, this old servant really didn't do anything. It's true, it's absolutely true. The old woman knelt and begged for mercy, kowtowing repeatedly. Arbor's cold gaze swept over her, and he didn't speak for a long time. A faint trace of disappointment flitted through her eyes, and she asked in a low voice, "How do you usually communicate with Zhang Huilan?" I have a jade talisman for communication. It's buried in that crack in the wall. Where is that Zhang Huilan right now? She followed the long family and ran away, the woman said shakily. In other words, no one can prove whether what you're saying right now is true or false. Xiao Mu sneered, throwing her a gaze that was as chilly as a snowy soul. What I've said, every word of it is, it's true. Little Grand, I don't dare to lie to you. As he spoke, a shadow flashed at the entrance of the cellar. Stay up late and a few night pavilion disciples walked over, each carrying a person. Everyone bowed toward Emo Lien and Xiao Mu in greeting. Yi said with a chuckle, "Crown Prince Consort, we've captured them." As soon as they finished speaking, a few trembling figures were thrown to the ground by their hands. They fell to the ground in front of the little Crown Princess. The woman's shadow, which was originally huddled together, suddenly stood up. She bared her fangs and brandished her claws, and was about to charge forward. But in an instant, she was frozen in place by a body-securing talisman. "Spare my life, spare my life." 4 or 5 people were crawling on the ground. They were in a sorry state and were only wearing underwear. It was obvious that these people had been dragged out of their beds and brought here. There were men and women, young men and women, as well as 13 or 14-year-old boys and girls trembling in fear. Granny Wang, the Crown Princess, saw that you were lonely on the road to the Yellow Springs, so I brought your family here. Arbor's eyes were cold, and his voice was indifferent. How about I send your family to the Yellow Springs to accompany you? Oh no. The Wang woman finally knew fear. Her entire shadow trembled like a sieve, and she couldn't stop shaking. "No, Crown Princess, you can't do this." "Why can't I do it?" The little Crown Princess coldly interrupted her. "If you smelly bugs. Every day, you think of ways to make my life difficult. Now you know fear?" Chapter 4058. Heh. The little stoic's voice was extremely bleak and apathetic. "How about I let you all have a taste of drifting in the void for several hundred years?" She raised a blue flame in her hand and aimed it at the people kneeling on the ground. She berated harshly, "If you don't speak, then all of you can die." "No, don't." Madame Wang let out a high-pitched shriek. "This old servant is willing to speak. Willing to speak. Willing to say anything. I beseech the Crown Princess to be magnanimous and let off my family's juniors." Arbor's apathetic gaze turned towards her. "The Zhang Huilan, I know. She didn't escape with the Long clan. Instead, she was taken to a big aristocratic family. Although they did these things behind my back, I still discovered some clues. That Zhang Huilan is in contact with the Mu family." "The Mu family?" Yes, it's that talisman patrician family, the Mu family." Arbor's eyes narrowed slightly. After circling back and forth for so long, why did it circle back to the Mu family? "Every word I said is the truth. I dare to swear on my soul that if I deceive the Crown Princess even half a sentence, I will be struck by lightning and have my soul scattered. I won't even be able to be a pig, a cow, or a lamb in my next life." As expected, it was a very vicious oath. Arbor swept her a cold glance and said with a nod, "Remember what you said today." After saying this, he stored this soul into a storage talisman with a wave of his hand. Arbor glanced coldly at the men and women pretending to be quails on the ground and walked out without a word. "Let them go after we verify whether her words are true or false." Aoyi waved his hand, and someone escorted the wailing men and women away. This old ghost was very crafty. Even at this time, she still wanted to swear loyalty to her master. Unfortunately, as long as the night pavilion targeted someone, it was impossible to not know their identity and background. Is she telling the truth? The venerable Peach Blossom Immortal turned to look at Mo Lien and asked. It's half true and half false. Prince Mo sighed. At this juncture, she still dares to not tell the truth? That old scoundrel definitely knows more than just this. Jojo is still too soft-hearted. A cold light flashed in Mo Lien's eyes, and her sight fell on the storage amulet that contained Wang Mama. The storage talisman trembled, and his father's extremely faint figure immediately fell down. Trembling, he knelt on the ground. Before Mo Lien could say anything, she kowtowed and said, Your Highness, this old servant is speaking the truth. This old servant has already— Mo Lien waved her hand, and Stay Up Late came in with a tray. There were 2 bloody fingers on it. Ugh. The old woman's face, which was like an afterimage, twisted with all her might. It's just 2 fingers now. Mo Lien curled her lips mockingly. Perhaps in less than a quarter of an hour, it will be an arm or an eyeball. You're very good. You fooled my Jojo. Mo Lien looked at her indifferently and said, You know that the crown princess won't really do anything to your family. You figured out her personality very well. Yes, the crown princess won't take her anger out on your family. Mo Lien smiled and nodded at her. She inched closer to the old woman and said in an extremely faint voice, I will. My babies, my mother fell and fractured her bones. I've been accompanying her in bed since last night. Chapter 4059. What was the use of torturing this shrew? Only by torturing what she cared about, and what she cared about would she tell him everything honestly, wasn't that so? To him, reputation and whatnot were not as important as his Jojo. This old shrew was willing to commit suicide for her master and didn't hesitate to die in such a gruesome manner. She didn't even care about her dignity. Why did she do it? Wasn't it because she wholeheartedly wanted to protect the person behind her? In this way, only by using a heavy hand on her would she be able to reveal something useful to them. Yi sat down at the table and took out a pen. He recorded everything the elderly woman said under the dim light in the cellar. Line by line, Prince Mo asked, and the elderly woman answered. She was very tactful and didn't leave out any details. Right now, elderly Lady Wang was very clear that as long as she left out half a sentence or said something that didn't satisfy His Highness the Crown Prince, she might be able to receive her grandchildren's hands or legs again very soon. Husband. Arbor went up to get some fresh air but didn't see Mo Lien and the venerable Peach Blossom Immortal coming up, so he dashed back into the cellar. However, he saw Mo Lien and Ma Yechen walking over. Mo Lien smiled faintly and pulled her small hand over, stuffing a piece of paper into her small hand. Write it all down. See if it's useful. Sir Jojo looked down and flipped open the paper, reading each line one by one. The more he read, the deeper and more terrifying the chill in his eyes became. In the end, it was so intense that water was about to drip out. So it was this person. So it was this person who had been scheming in the dark all this time, constantly clinging onto her and wanting her to lose everything. The little stoic looked unperturbed on the surface, but she had already meticulously linked and calculated everything that had happened from the lower star domain to the middle 6 prefectures and then to the upper 3 provinces in her mind. The more she thought, the more apprehensive she became. Her eyes were like ice soul frost pearls, emitting a sharp and cold glint. To think that he had hidden himself so deeply that he had even managed to conceal himself from her time and time again. Let's go to Mu, reporting to your highness, the crown princess. Xiao Yi rushed over and cupped his hands. The Mu family's main house in the Winter Moon Mountain Forest was attacked by an unknown assassin. The entire Mu family is now resisting the enemy. Eldest young Master Mu seems to have suffered some minor injuries. Arbor was taken aback as he thought, that's right. Brother should have reached sovereign capital a long time ago. Last time, when Tianyun attacked the Mu family hid in the tunnels. Who would have thought that not long after, they would come again? Does Tian Yun really want the Mu family's talisman technique? Or some people have been coveting the Mu family's talisman technique for a long time. Arbor clenched her fist and held the piece of paper tightly in her hand. She looked up at Mo Lien, who was smiling at her, and said, "Let's go." The latter naturally nodded. The group of people quietly left the farm. Mo Lien arranged for Fang Su to lead a part of the Greenwood Guards to pacify the people. The rest followed Aoi, Xiao Yi, and the other Night Pavilion disciples to Winter Moon Mountain Forest together with Prince Mo and the little Crown Princess. Under the heavy night sky, the sounds of battle shook the sky in Winter Moon Mountain Forest. Blood had already flowed like a river at the Mu family's entrance. Compared to the previous night attack, the Mu family's casualties were obviously more disastrous this time. Even the Mu family's old patriarch didn't expect that Tian Yun would make a comeback after just a few days and attack them again. And what shocked them the most was Chapter 4060. The person who led the team to the Mu residence to kill them was actually their former Mu family head, Mu Jingfeng. Mu Jingshua spat out a mouthful of blood, nonchalantly wiping the blood off his face. His eyes stared fixedly at the familiar figure standing at the Mu family's mountain entrance with his hands behind his back, and he could not help but burst into wild laughter. "Mu Jingfeng, I really didn't expect that the one who brought people from the heavenly fate realm to harm our family was actually you. Mu Jingfeng, are you still human? You actually..." An elder was only halfway through his words when he suddenly realized that Mu Jingfeng was swatting a palm at him. A bolt of lightning struck the elder's body with the force of a thunderbolt. His upper body was instantly broken, and his entire body was like a book. With a crack, he was slammed shut by a palm. Seeing that Mu family elder's death was especially gruesome, the other elder's expressions immediately changed drastically. Mu Jingshua sternly shouted, "Everyone, don't be courteous with him. Attack together." Several elders of the Mu family timidly took 2 steps back. The remaining 5 elders, including Elder Dao and Elder Du, quickly followed Mu Jingzhuang and rushed forward. Mu Jingfeng stood with his hands behind his back, assuming the posture of an expert as he cast a sidelong glance at everyone. With a wave of his palm, he sent out another wave of lightning spiritual energy. Sizzling sounds were heard, and countless bolts of lightning burrowed into an elder's body like thin snakes. It instantly caused the elder to wail miserably. Everyone could not help but shudder. They saw that elder's body seemed to be grabbed by a force as he floated up into the air. Countless snake-like lightning bolts flowed through his limbs and bones, ultimately converging on his face and head. "Elder!" Mu Jingshua roared, his eyes about to pop out of their sockets. Sizzling sounds could be heard coming from that elder's face as countless electric currents twisted under the skin on his face like snakes. Not long after, with a pop, his face exploded, and his facial features were instantly destroyed by the power of lightning. His flesh and blood were badly mangled, and his entire face was flattened by the explosion. The disciples of the Mu family shuddered in unison. They clenched the weapons in their hands and involuntarily took a few steps back. Mu Dongni suddenly jumped up from the back of the crowd and roared in exasperation, "Brother, are you crazy? How could you? Halfway through her words, Mu Dongni met Mu Jingfeng's gaze. That incomparably cold gaze made her feel suffocated, and she couldn't help but shudder. Terrifying. She had never seen such a heartless and terrifying expression on Mu Jingfeng's face. Was this still the same big brother of the family head who always put the family above everything else and regarded the family as more important than the sky? This wasn't Mu Jingfeng at all, right? How could a person change so much in such a short period of time? And what was going on with his body? How could he suddenly stand up and possess such great strength? The power of lightning in his body was also very strange. She remembered that her elder brother had never comprehended the lightning spirit of the 5 spirits before. What was going on? Now, even this child, Xingqian, was no match for his father. She remembered that in the past, Xingqian's strength could absolutely crush her elder brother. Mu Dongni was flabbergasted. She braced herself and could not help but ask, "Big brother, What's going on with you? He. Mu Jingfeng let out a very strange laugh. Chapter 4061. It was completely different from the way he usually spoke. Mu Jingfeng's cold eyes stared fixedly at Mu Dongni and the others. Everyone felt their hair stand on end from his gaze, not daring to breathe loudly. Kill! Mu Jingfeng suddenly raised his hand and issued an iron-blooded order to the numerous Heavenly Fate members behind him. Everyone from the Heavenly Fate sect was wrapped in diagonally hanging black robes. A crescent moon was embroidered on the corner of each robe with silver thread. Clearly, this was the symbol of one of the Heavenly Fate sect's halls. However, under such circumstances, no one paid attention to these marks. Every member of the Mu family was forced to gather all the strength they could to fight against the members of Heavenly Fate that Mu Jingfeng had brought with him. There was no other reason. If they didn't fight, then they could only wait for death. Mu Jingfeng coldly stared at them, as if they weren't his family but a bunch of weak ants. His lips curled into a mocking and callous smile, and his eyes faintly flickered with 2 balls of black mist. Kill! With that order, all the disciples of the Heavenly Fate sect charged towards the Mu family at an extremely fast speed. Mu Xingchen drew a spiritual fire in his palm and rustled it into the crowd. The fire spirit wall enveloped several Mu family members around him. At the same time, countless blue talismans flew out of Mu Xingchen's body and whooshed forward, forming a thick defensive shield. Insignificant skill. A trace of anger flitted across Mu Jingfeng's eyes, and he suddenly raised his hand and pointed. More than a dozen attack talismans, also imbued with talisman energy, whooshed into the air. They hit the defensive shield in front of Mu Xingchen by a hair's breadth. Under this attack, the talisman arrays on both sides emitted a long buzzing sound. Mu Xingchen's defensive shield was instantly broken by the attack talismans. Mu Jingfeng's maniacal laughter filled their ears. Haha! I did it! I did it! I'm an Earth Stage Great Talisman Master, haha! I've finally become an Earth Stage Great Talisman Master. Everyone's gazes couldn't help but slightly focus. Elder Dao couldn't help but tighten his grip on his weapon. An Earth Stage Great Talisman Master? What kind of terrifying existence was this? In the entire Mu family's several hundred years, the number of Earth-grade Great Talisman Masters could be counted on one's fingers. Mu Jingfeng, that vile spawn, was actually a step ahead of others and advanced into the ranks of Earth-grade Great Symbol Masters? Bastard! A furious roar pierced through everyone's heads. Mu Xingchen clutched his chest, forcibly suppressing a mouthful of blood. Looking back, he saw his grandfather, Mu Tsang, leading more than a dozen Mu family elders, quickly moving towards them. Beast, why aren't you stopping? Mu Tsang coldly glared at Mu Jingfeng, his eyes full of disappointment and hatred. Who would have thought that his eldest son, who was so outstanding when he was young, would actually end up in such a state with the Mu family? He actually led people to attack my family. How much does he hate my family? Mu Jingfeng's eyes revealed a trace of hatred as he pointed at Mu Tsang and scolded, "You still dare to put on airs in front of me at a time like this? Why are you looking at me like that?" This father of his, there was not a single thing that he was satisfied with. Every time, he would look at her with a look of utter disappointment, as if she was nothing more than a bug in a manure pit, completely unworthy of his attention. He hated it too much. He hated his father's heartlessness, stripping him of his position as the family head. Chapter 4062. He hated even more the person who had crippled him and forced him to step onto this underworld path. That's right, he hated them. He came to take revenge on them. However, that little bastard was truly the most hateful. However, he brought people to attack the Mu family this time. Even if he captured everyone in the Mu family, he probably wouldn't let that little bastard submit. After all, this little bastard was incomparably cold and heartless from the bottom of his heart to the depths of his bones. She would not sacrifice her own interests for these Mu family members. Mu Jingfeng narrowed his eyes and coldly stared at family head Mu. If you're willing to hand over the talisman remnant scroll, I can still spare your lives. Big brother, don't keep making mistakes. Mu Dongni could not help but cry out. I'm doing this because you're forcing me. Mu Jingfeng sternly looked at everyone, his face contorted malevolently. Xingqian, go to the ancestral hall and bring the talisman remnant scroll to father. Mu Xingqian coldly looked at the man in front of him, as though it was his first time meeting this person. His eyes did not have the slightest bit of warmth for a son respecting his father as he coldly said, "Dream on." Ha! Ha! Mu Jingfeng's face contorted as he laughed heartily. Smash the Mu family's ancestral hall for me. Mu Jingfeng's face was frosty as he gave the order. Use this jade talisman to break the array in the ancestral hall. Bastard! Countless Mu family disciples and elders were visibly moved as they glared angrily at Mu Jingfeng's crazy behavior. This was too crazy. As a member of the Mu family, this Mu Jingfeng could actually do such an inhumane thing. Fight it out with them. Mu Jingshua angrily shouted with reddened eyes as he flew toward Mu Jingfeng. You're courting death. Mu Jingfeng sternly shouted and raised his hand to slap Mu Jingshua's chest. With a crack, Mu Jingshua's sternum was shattered by his palm. He flew backward and fell heavily to the ground. Mu Jingshua spat out a mouthful of blood and fell to the ground, instantly losing consciousness. Jingshua! Shouted Patriarch Mu angrily. He turned his head and looked at the ancestral hall. A group of heavenly fate disciples was indeed running in that direction. Mu Jingfeng chuckled. Since you won't give it to me, then I can only personally bring my men over to get it. Ah! Several disciples of the Mu family who had come forward to intercept the heavenly fate sect were chopped to the ground. They could only watch as hundreds and thousands of heavenly fate sect disciples in black robes ran towards the ancestral hall. Smash it for me! Mu Jingfeng bellowed. All the disciples of the All-Fate sect swarmed forward and smashed the tablets in the ancestral hall. The disciples of the Mu family rushed over, but the ancestral hall was originally only so big. In addition, everyone was crowded there, so they couldn't play at all. As soon as the battle broke out, half of the ancestral hall was affected by the power of the battle and collapsed with a rumble. When Arbor arrived, he saw this scene. Her mother's memorial tablet was held in her big brother's arms. Her big brother's chest was stained with blood, and he was currently fighting with 2 Tianyun sub-leaders. From the looks of it, he was at a disadvantage. Who dares to disturb my mother's rest? Arbor's voice was ice cold. All of you can die for me. Boom! A ball of divine power unexpectedly exploded in the middle of the group of heavenly fate disciples. The divine power ball with a large area of destruction instantly blasted many heavenly fate sect disciples into pieces. Wails of agony filled the air. The 8th night watch ends. I'm sleeping soundly. I'm exhausted. Chapter 4063. Little bastard. Mu Jingfeng had just let out a curse when he saw a black flame heading straight for his face. It was fast, so fast that it was practically impossible to dodge. Mu Jingfeng's expression changed slightly. He only had time to apply 7 to 8 defensive talismans on himself before colliding with that black flame. He was instantly engulfed by the black flame and sent flying. Mu Jingfeng simply did not dare to believe his eyes. He was actually sent flying by someone else's black flame. When his body landed heavily on the ground and he heard a crisp sound coming from his back, he belatedly realized that he had been knocked to the ground by someone. How was this possible? He had already risen to become a 6th-level God-tier master, alright? That was why he could crush Mu Xingqian and most of the people in the Mu family. But now, he was actually crawling on the ground like a dead dog. He completely did not dare to believe that he had actually been hit by someone and was lying on the ground again. No, that's impossible, that's impossible. Mu Jingfeng lay on the ground and shook his head repeatedly. He absolutely did not believe that he could not get up again. That was impossible. He had barely stood up for a day. He had suffered so much pain and experienced so many hardships before he could finally recover his strength and was even more powerful than before. He had stood up. He had brought so many disciples of the heavenly fate realm back to the Mu family to crush these Mu family members who had once stripped him of his position as family head and trampled on him. But now he was completely crushed by a person who didn't even see his hand gesture clearly. Arbor did not care about how Mu Jingfeng, who was lying on the ground and could not help but curl up from the pain in his back, was doing right now. She only knew that Mu Jingfeng had brought so many disciples of the heavenly fate realm to smash the Mu family's ancestral hall for his own selfish desires. He had even almost smashed her mother's memorial tablet. Just based on this point alone, it would not be enough even if he died 10,000 times. You guys are truly disgusting. Arbor coldly stared at the group of black-robed people standing in front of her. With a wave of her small hand, a blue spark slowly ignited. You dare to come and smash my mother's ancestral hall. I'll let you filthy creatures in the corners never reincarnate. Her voice was abnormally cold. Although her tone was extremely calm and unhurried, the words that came out of her mouth made people shiver uncontrollably. It was bone-chilling. Everyone's hearts couldn't help but tremble slightly, and there was a hint of fear in their eyes. Arbor raised his hand, only to see the blue spark floating on his fingertips ignite a beautiful arc in the air. Mu Jingfeng was sprawled on the ground. He was in so much pain that he couldn't stop moving his body as he bellowed, "Disperse! Spread out!" All the disciples of the Heavenly Fate sect were startled, but they obeyed the order and quickly spread out. At the same time, the blue sparks in Arbor's hand were already falling from the sky. Countless beautiful blue flowers bloomed like fireworks, crackling and bursting, rustling and falling into the crowd. The moment a disciple of the Heavenly Fate sect was hit by the blue sparks, blood immediately blossomed. Mu Jingfeng's back was severely injured, and he could not get up for a while. He could only move his body bit by bit, wanting to get away from the blue flames. Chapter 4064. However, these little blue flames attacked indiscriminately. Mu Jingfeng was sprawled on the ground, so it was difficult for him to move, so it was naturally difficult for him to avoid being hit. After several blue flames exploded on his body in succession, Mu Jingfeng couldn't help but snort angrily. He shouted sternly, "Arbor! You unfilial daughter! You actually dare to treat your father like this!" Arbor turned a deaf ear to this person's clamor. Blue spiritual cleansing fire poured out endlessly, and countless blue flames blotted out the sky and formed a nebula in midair. With a light tug from the little stoic's slender hand, they abruptly plummeted downwards. The blue flames seemed to be sentient and smashed towards the black-robed people as if they had grown eyes. In the blink of an eye, they had already smashed a dozen or so Heavenly Fate disciples to the ground. When the surrounding Mu clan disciples heard this, their spirits were greatly roused, and they each gripped their spirit weapons and fought back with all their might. If they didn't counterattack now, what were they waiting for? This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and they wouldn't have another chance if they missed it. At this time, the Mu clan disciples were also riled up by the killing. There was no need for Mu Jingyuan and the others to command them. These Mu clan disciples automatically formed small teams and cooperated with each other to charge at those unlucky black-robed people of the Heavenly Fate sect. Although the Mu clan disciples weren't very cooperative, fortunately, both sides were actually completely exhausted after a round of fighting. The Heavenly Fate sect's people were being suppressed by the little crown princess's group, so how could they exert even half of their strength? Hence, the Mu clan disciples seized this opportunity to swiftly counterattack. They didn't care about any order or morality as they ganged up on one person and beat them up violently until they annihilated them. Arbor looked on coldly from the sidelines. He stood outside the crowd and slowly walked towards Mu Xingchen. Along the way, not a single Heavenly Fate sect disciple dared to rush in front of her to court death. In reality, she didn't even need to lift a finger if there were any blind people who wanted to jump in front of her. Mo Lien, He Chen, and the others would have dealt with them remotely long ago from 3 feet away. With an icy expression, the little crown princess stepped on the blood-soaked ground and slowly arrived in front of Mu Xingchen. She reached out to take her mother's memorial tablet from him. "Jojo." Mu Xingchen heaved a sigh of relief, but before he could say anything, she flicked the healing pill into his mouth. Arbor lowered his head slightly, revealing half of his slender white neck. Her eyes were extremely focused as she slowly took out a handkerchief from her sleeve and carefully wiped the 2 drops of blood on the memorial tablet. She carefully cleaned it up and gently stroked the spirit tablet with her small hand. As he turned around, he said coldly with an indifferent expression, "Kill them all on the spot. We don't need anyone alive." "Yes." Countless black shadows obeyed the order and rushed into the battle circle. They caught the black-robed man and chopped his head with 3 sabers and 2 swords. Countless unlucky disciples of the Heavenly Fate sect immediately fell to the ground, unable to get up. The disciples of the Mu family held the swords in their hands and retreated to the side in a daze. Because there was no need for these weak chickens to make a move. The underworld court guards took over the mission of killing him, and they acted quickly and decisively. In less than a moment, they eliminated more than half of the Heavenly Fate sect disciples as if they were chopping vegetables. A underworld court guard kicked away a Heavenly Fate sect disciple beside him. As he turned around, the sharp edge of his sword sliced open the throat of a black-robed man behind him. The cold light flashed past as fast as lightning, dazzling everyone's eyes. Chapter 4065. A head was sent flying into the distance. The Nether Court guards were well-trained and moved extremely quickly. Every one of them controlled their divine power and attached it to their spirit weapons. They never wasted their energy hitting the other party's limbs and only focused on chopping off the head. What was the use of a Providence disciple if you didn't chop off his head? So what if you only hit his limbs? He could still move no matter how crippled he was. The Mu family disciples were all dumbstruck at this moment, and many of them looked down at their hands in a daze. Just a moment ago, they were still being beaten to a pulp by these crooked cultivators and were practically powerless to retaliate. After the young crown princess led her men over, the situation immediately reversed. What kind of strength and influence was this? No one wanted to admit that they were weak, but this was the reality. Compared to these well-trained soldiers, their Mu family disciples were truly a sheet of loose sand. No wonder the young crown princess looked down on them back then. When the Mu family elders thought of this, they couldn't help but exchange glances and sigh quietly. Reporting to the crown princess. A Nether Court guard swiftly arrived in front of the young crown princess and reported with a salute, "The Providence disciples have all retreated to the rear court." After them, Arbor ordered coldly, "Kill them all." Arbor looked back at his eldest brother, who was slowly recovering, and said with a nod, "If there's nothing else, come with us." Mu Xingchen nodded and caught up with the little fellow. Mu Xingchen was extremely silent the entire way. If it weren't for the little stoic glancing back from time to time, it really would be very difficult to sense his fluctuating aura. "You're upset?" Mu Xingchen maintained his silence, but his tightly clenched fists that were pressed against his sides repeatedly demonstrated how terrible his current mood was. "Because your father brought people to smash the Mu residence and kill the Mu family clansmen?" Mu Xingchen abruptly looked up at her, a trace of pain and anguish in his eyes. "Jojo, he's also your father." "Heh." Arbor let out an indifferent sneer. After a while, that cold voice sounded in Mu Xingchen's ears. "She's not anymore." Mu Xingchen's heart trembled. He glanced sideways at her, only to see an indifferent expression on her cold little face. This was true indifference. There was not the slightest fluctuation in her emotions. It was as if Mu Jingfeng was just a stranger to her. In fact, this was indeed the case. To Jojo, Mu Jingfeng had never fulfilled his duty as a father. When Jojo was struggling to survive in the lower star field, what was Mu Jingfeng doing? He spent Long Chuyun's dowry, 8 delicacies, and raised a charming mistress. He enjoyed all the glory, splendor, and wealth. He was of no help to Jojo at all. Even after Jojo returned to Shenzhou, if he was willing to show a trace of kindness to Jojo, perhaps the father and daughter would not have ended up like this. No, there was nothing. Mu Jingfeng probably only coveted Jojo, spied on her, and used her. He coveted her talisman technique secrets and wanted to constantly spy on her. He wanted to use her identity as the crown princess to obtain some benefits. He had never treated her sincerely, so why should Jojo reciprocate with sincerity? Mu Xingchen heaved a long sigh. It was no wonder Jojo disliked him so much. After all, There was a cause for an effect. Everyone chased after the heavenly fate sect disciples and flew to the backyard. Chapter 4066. Who would have thought that the moment they stepped through the backyard's arched door, they would hear a sweet laughter? Heh. I advise you not to act recklessly. The soft voice was carried by the wind into everyone's ears. Mu Xingchen and the rest stopped in their tracks as they stood at the arched door and looked inside. Over 300 black-robed heavenly fate sect disciples came out from one end of the garden and surrounded a red-clothed beauty like stars drying the moon. That beauty wore a thin and soft satin dress with a bow tied at her chest. Her dress was loose, revealing half of her round shoulders. Thorny Rose, Mu Jingfeng called out with slight excitement. He did not expect that Vice Hall Master Thorny Rose would also come. Then, there was definitely hope for him. However, that woman called Thorny Rose merely cast a sidelong glance at him and immediately revealed an extremely disdainful expression. Why are you paralyzed again? Thorny Rose sneered and shook her head mockingly. You're really too weak. You're always paralyzed on the ground and can't get up. How are you going to work for our organization like this? Mu Jingfeng's complexion immediately turned green and white from this woman's disdain. He was indeed in a very sorry state right now. Mu Jingfeng, whose back was in incessant pain, simply could not stand on his own. At this moment, he was being supported by 2 heavenly fate sect disciples and could barely stand there. Although he was very angry inside, he still had to pretend to be a grandson and smile obsequiously. Yes, it's my fault. I underestimated this group of Mu family members too much. Jingfeng. Elder Mu was furious, his pair of ox-like eyes practically popping out of their sockets. Look at this good son of his with that flattering appearance. Was this still the once awe-inspiring Mu family's previous patriarch? Don't call me that. Mu Jingfeng angrily glared at Mu Tsang, his eyes brimming with hatred and anger. If you truly had the slightest bit of familial affection for me, you wouldn't have caused me to be in this state today. The Mu family's first elder's face darkened, and he could not help but sneer mockingly. Why don't you find the reason from yourself? Why did ancestor Zhaoyang change your position as patriarch? This shows that you simply don't have the ability to sit in this position. Shut up! Mu Jingfeng screamed, his entire body trembling in agitation. The 2 heavenly fate disciples who were supporting him were already exhausted after the battle. At this moment, Mu Jingfeng's entire body was trembling and struggling, and they nearly failed to support him. Mu Jingfeng hurriedly turned to look in Thorn's direction and begged with a fawning expression, Vice Hall Master, please give me another bottle of recovery medicine. I will cherish it this time. I won't let myself fall again. Thorny Rose let out a cold snort from her nose. Clearly, she disapproved of his words. Mo Lien and He Qin frowned and couldn't help but look at each other. They both had some doubts in their hearts. Recovery potion? From Mu Jingfeng's tone, it seemed to be very magical. However, he and He Qin were very clear that Mo Lien's attack had completely destroyed Mu Jingfeng's lumbar bones. Logically speaking, if Mu Jingfeng did not have a peerless doctor like Jojo to treat him in this lifetime, there should be no possibility for him to stand up. However, from his words, it seemed that he was very confident in this recovery potion and felt that once he consumed it, he would immediately be able to move again? Please, Vice Hall Master Thorny Rose, Mu Jingfeng flattered. Chapter 4067. For the sake of that bottle of recovery medicinal liquid, Mu Jingfeng did not hesitate to crawl over while trembling in front of everyone, completely throwing his dignity to the back of his mind. The group of Mu family's disciples simply looked at each other in dismay, their eyes revealing disbelief. Was this kind of person really their former family head? Why you bastard! Elder Mu Tsang was so angry that his face turned slightly pale, and his lips could not help but tremble. Matriarch Mu sighed and walked to Elder Mu's side. She raised her hand and stroked his chest. Old master, don't be too agitated. Mu Jingfeng was now willing to submit to Tianyun. He truly did not care about his own face at all. In front of everyone in the family, His disgraceful behavior was simply unbearable to watch. She stepped on Mu Jingfeng's head, which was lying in front of her, with her bare feet. "All right, seeing that you're so tactful, I'll give you another chance." Thank you. Thank you, Vice Hall Master Tu Wei. Mu Jingfeng raised his head in pleasant surprise and reverently held up the other party's foot with both hands. Arbor expressionlessly watched everything unfold before him. He was unlike the other Mu family members, whose eyes revealed resentment, anger, shame, and humiliation. She did not have any expression and merely watched indifferently from a bystander. She watched as this stinking bug consumed the medicinal liquid that the woman threw to him. She watched as he ecstatically poured it into his mouth. She watched as his body curled up in pain, rolling back and forth on the ground while howling angrily. She watched as he carelessly gnawed on the soil in the garden like a pitiful bug. His fingernails dug into his skin, until his palms were drenched in blood and not a single piece of flesh was left intact. In the end, the disheveled Mu Jingfeng finally stood up. However, his face seemed to have slimmed down and aged quite a bit. His entire person was even more emaciated. Arbor shook his head. This recovery medicinal liquid should be one of the improved medicinal liquids produced by Tianyun. Due to the black crystal controlling their consciousness, as long as their heads weren't chopped off, their bodies could still twist and shake no matter how serious their injuries were. Even if it couldn't walk upright, it could still crawl like a snake or twist like a worm. This kind of recovery medicine was a kind of medicine that allowed the members of the Sky Fate organization to get up, no matter how serious their injuries were. It sounded miraculous, but it was only a kind of medicinal liquid that treated the symptoms but not the root of the problem. A body that had recovered so quickly. Had it really recovered? Not at all. For example, Mu Jingfeng's back had suffered such a serious injury. Would he really recover after taking the recovery medicine? No, his bones were still broken, and his meridians were still in a mess. This kind of medicinal liquid only allowed him to have a final radiance of the setting sun for a short period of time. To put it bluntly, he was depriving Mu Jingfeng of his 5 senses and 6 senses. His nerves could no longer feel pain. He was no longer human. Previously, when she saw Mu Jingfeng struggling on the ground, she had been giggling non-stop. Now that she saw Elder Mu Tsang's face full of anger and wanted to surround them with people, she could not help but sneer. "I advise you to take a good look before making a move." This woman smiled at Elder Mu with certainty. She then waved her hand and had people escort the group of women from the rear residence forward. Chapter 4068. The first to bear the brunt was Madame Mu, who was tied up at the front, as well as the 5th branch's Madame Hua, the 4th branch's 5th Miss, Mu Rakan, and several other female members of the Mu family. Mu Qingya's face was slightly pale as she looked at Mu Jingfeng, who was in a sorry state. It was obvious that she had seen the scene just now. At this moment, her eyes were filled with tears as she looked at her husband with hidden bitterness, as though she was very distressed by his changes. Her tears silently flowed down drop by drop. "Old master, save us, old master." The group of weeping women, who were detained by the All-Fate sect's disciples, cried and begged for mercy one after another. Matriarch Mu's expression changed slightly. Ever since the incident, she had been protected by old Master Mu's people. At that time, they had also sent people to the inner residence to search for the other family members. However, the Mu family's branches lived rather far away in the entire Winter Moon Mountain Forest, so they couldn't immediately inform all the women to leave. Matriarch Mu only led people to save a portion of them. She didn't expect the rest to be captured by the enemy. Seeing these delicate granddaughters, who were originally raised in the boudoir and had no cultivation, fall into the hands of the enemy, Matriarch Mu's heart seemed to bleed, and the rims of her eyes turned red. "What exactly do you want?" "Matriarch, you're a reasonable person." Xin Qianwei giggled. "We've already told you the purpose of our trip. Hand over the talisman fragments in the ancestral hall, and we can consider letting you go. Actually, we really don't want to be enemies with the Mu family." Matriarch Mu sneered. Before she could speak, 5th Miss Mu Rakan coldly said, "Grandpa father, you don't have to do anything to humiliate the Mu family for me." What's there to be afraid of in death? Mu Rockin coldly said, It's just slap. Before she could finish speaking, she received a heavy slap to the face. Mu Rockin's father, fourth son Mu Jingxiao's eyes instantly reddened. What are you doing? Mu Qingya sobbed softly and looked at matriarch Mu with tears in her eyes. Mother, don't worry about us. The Mu family's talisman fragments can't be handed over, and the Mu family's dignity can't be lost. It's our honor to die for the Mu family. Slap. This time, the heavenly fate disciples who were grabbing the women became even angrier. One of them directly slapped Mu Qingya in the face and even tore the clothes on her shoulders. We want to see just how tough the Mu family's mouth is. Such a delicate and fair madam, it's really embarrassing to reward her to us brothers. Ha! Following the strange laughter, Mu Qingya's tears fell one by one, but she still tightly pursed her lips and put on an unyielding look. She lowered her head and refused to make a sound. Qingya. Matriarch Mu's heart softened immediately. Qingya, this child, had been working hard for the Mu family for so many years. She had taken care of the family's affairs from top to bottom. Such a gentle and kind-hearted child, how could she bear to watch her suffer like this? Arbor suddenly sneered, How long are you going to act? Acting every day, deceiving this and that. After deceiving so many people for so many years, I just want to ask you, is it tiring to live like this? See you tomorrow. Chapter 4069. The surroundings were silent, except for Arbor's faint questioning voice. There was no other sound. Inexplicably, many of the Mu family's disciples seemed to have even lightened their breathing a little. They could clearly feel that the little crown princess's mood was fluctuating like a violent storm. Although she still looked expressionless, the depths of her almond-shaped eyes had long been dyed with a roaring fury. Mu Qingya raised her head with tears in her eyes and looked at Arbor strangely. She looked around with a puzzled expression and put on an expression that said, Are you talking to me? Clat, clat, clat. Arbor's little face was expressionless as she clapped hard. I was too naive. I didn't know there was someone with such superb acting skills in this world. In the most prosperous opera house in the imperial capital, the most famous entertainer's acting ability is not even 100,000th of First Madam's. The first time you ordered to clean up the Mu family, you didn't get the talisman remnant scroll. You were very unwilling, right? It's only been a few days, and now there's another wave. Arbor shook her little head and stared at Mu Qingya indifferently. Do you think this crown princess can't do anything to that Mammy Wang who killed herself by swallowing poison? With a wave of her little hand, she grabbed a faint remnant soul in her hand and tossed it around casually. Does First Madam still know this person? The Mu family disciples looked in Mu Qingya's direction in bewilderment. What was going on? According to the Crown Prince Consort's meaning, the Mu family's calamity this time was actually First Madam ordered to come to the Mu family to search for the talisman remnant scroll? Who was First Madam? Who could she order? The group of people who broke into the Mu family's old residence were all members of the Tianyun cult. Could it be that First Madam? Everyone's eyes involuntarily shrank, including Old Master Mu Tsong, and they all looked in First Madam Mu's direction in disbelief. Mu Qingya couldn't help but turn pale and her body swayed. Jojo, what do you mean? Do you think that a weak woman like me can give any orders? Everyone came back to their senses when they heard this. That's right, First Madam was just an ordinary person. She was just an ordinary housewife. Who could she give orders to in Tianyun? What ability did she have to do such a thing? Just thinking about it made it seem impossible. Could it be that the crown princess had misunderstood something? Or perhaps he had thought wrongly? The little crown princess applauded again and shook the remnant soul of Nanny Wang in her hand. This is your woman, First Madam. Don't tell me you don't know her. Mu Qingya looked at Arbor with a pitiful expression, and tears fell uncontrollably. Jojo, please believe me. I grew up in the Mu family, was born in the Mu family, was raised in the Mu family, and ate and used everything in the Mu family. The Mu family has treated me so well that I can't betray them. Matriarch Mu nodded and also persuaded, that's true. Jojo, what do you mean by that? First Madam's wife is just a weak housewife. What orders can she give and who can she order to do things? Husband. Arbor rolled his eyes, looking like he couldn't be bothered to say more to them. Mo Lien couldn't help but want to laugh. She walked up and held her little hand. Chapter 4070. The little girl had said less than 3 sentences, but she already felt like she had said everything she wanted to say. It was really funny. Mo Lien turned to look at Madame Mu and said in a low voice, "Bring her here." Soon, an old nanny in green clothes was gagged. Her shoulders kept twisting as she was pushed and escorted over. Mu Qingya glanced at the old woman, but her expression didn't change at all. Her gaze toward Xiao Mu was still gentle and benevolent, but it also contained a bit of helplessness and bewilderment. It was as if an elder could unreasonably condone the younger generation's unreasonable behavior. She sighed softly. Nanny Chiu, who was beside her, glanced at the little crown princess but didn't say anything. The maid, Song Lu, couldn't help but yell angrily, "Crown princess, our madam is so good to you and always thinks of you. She doesn't dare to neglect you in anything. How can you do this? Can you just find 2 old maids who are not familiar with her to slander her? Since we've brought them here, it means we have complete evidence." Ao Yi kicked the nanny in the back of her knee, causing her to kneel on the ground in pain. She flopped and fell at Arbor's feet. Madame Mu should be very familiar with this Zhang Huilan. Ao Yi smiled faintly and kicked the woman. "Madame Mu, why don't you take a closer look?" Madame Mu's expression was cold. She glanced at Nanny Zhang from the corner of her eyes and shook her head. "I don't know this person and I don't know what you're talking about." Arbor looked at her with a frosty expression for a long time before saying faintly, "You've already exposed your identity." "Tian Yun, Fei Tian Tian, Hall Master, Mu Qingya." Xiao Mu tossed a confession certificate in front of her, allowing it to flutter to Mu Qingya's feet. "What nonsense are you talking about?" Song Lu was furious. She pointed at the sharp blade pressed against her neck. "Don't you see what this is? Tian Yun's people broke into our Mu clan and captured us, but now you, stop acting." Mo Lien interrupted Song Lu's words and did not even look at the other party. He stared at Mu Qingya for a long time before nodding with a smile. "The Hall Master of the Soaring Heavens Hall is indeed very capable. You didn't waste your years of painstaking effort and hiding in the Mu family. Zhang Huilan is the spy you placed in the Long family. I've always found it strange. When did the Long family branch in the imperial capital surrender to the Heavenly Fate Empire? So it turns out that everything is related to your operation." Mu Qingya looked at Mo Lien in astonishment. She tightly gripped the handkerchief in her hand, and with tears in her eyes, she asked in confusion, "Your Highness, why do you say that?" "Stop pretending." Xiao Mu was so disgusted by her that she abruptly pulled her husband behind her. She glared at Mu Qingya in disdain and said, "Don't use your little white face to look at Xiao Xiao's lotus. It's disgusting." Nanny Chiu supported Mu Qingya, who was on the verge of collapsing, and said in a low voice, "Crown Princess, please be careful with your words. Ever since you returned to the Mu clan in the Divine Province, ask yourself honestly, has Madame Mu ever mistreated you? Madame Mu treats your mother with the utmost sincerity. Even biological sisters can't be better," Nanny Chiu said coldly. Chapter 4071. Do you know that First Madam even used the Yen Sheng technique to curse Long Shouxin, the head of the Long family, for your mother's sake? How could she be the head of the Tianyun Hall? How could she help the Long family escape from the capital? Crown Princess, you have a deep misunderstanding about First Madam, Nanny Chiu said in a deep voice. I know that I can't explain it to you in a short time. But please believe in one thing. First Madam absolutely has no ill intentions towards your deceased mother and you. Keep pretending, keep pretending. Arbor's lips curved slightly, as if there was a crack at the corner of his mouth, and he smiled eerily. Mu Qingya, why don't we put all the things you've done one by one? Let's start with Shi Huixin being your scapegoat. What do you think? First Madam Mu slowly raised her head, looking as gentle as ever. Although there was a knife on her neck, half of the clothes on her shoulders were torn, and her hair was a little messy, her eyes were clear. She still looked like the calm first madam who was standing in the back hall of the Mu family's courtyard, and the madam in charge of the whole family. Arbor's eyes flickered, and he couldn't help but applaud her elegant demeanor. Mu Qingya, you probably didn't expect that a little girl from a small village in the Lower Star region would be out of your control. When you found out, you suddenly felt that everything was out of control and deviated from the original track. There was no way to set things right. Arbor tilted his head, and there was a hint of a smile in his eyes. He looked at her and said word by word, I, Arbor, have returned to the divine land. The disciples of the Mu family fixed their eyes on the little crown princess and stared at her deeply. For a moment they felt speechless. You've been scheming against me since the first day I set foot in the divine land. It's not what you think. Qiao Qiao, you truly have a deep misunderstanding about me. Mu Qingya wiped the corners of her eyes with a handkerchief. She wanted to explain herself, but Xiao Mu cut her off. I didn't misunderstand you. When I learned that you were the hall master of the heavenly fortune soaring heavens hall, who I've only heard of but never seen in person, I was shocked. Xiao Mu turned around and suddenly smiled sweetly at Mu Qingya. Her smile was unhurried, like a snow jade lotus that had suddenly bloomed. It was cold and exquisite, making it nearly impossible for people to avert their eyes. I went through all the things in my heart. Mu Qingya pointed at her heart and said slowly, You're really amazing. I've suspected you more than once. But every time, you managed to escape successfully. You gave me the feeling that you're a perfect person. Gentle, skilled, noble, and even flawless. Mu Qingya's SS heart. Mu Qingya looked at her with tears in her eyes. Tears fell one after another, and she reached out to cover her heart. Shizas. You and I both know Shi Huixin's identity very well. Xiao Mu gazed at her deeply. The probability of pulling off so many petty tricks under the nose of the matriarch of the household who has been managing the Mu clan for so many years is practically zero. Chapter 4072. Shi Huixin could actually bring that fake Qiao Yingchun back to the Mu family. This can only mean one thing. Arbor looked at Mu Qingya expressionlessly. You knew from the beginning. No, you should know very well whether it was true or not. Arbor looked at her silently and stared at her deeply. From the beginning, Shi Huixin was just a small chess piece in your hand. It was you who wanted to ruin this old consort's reputation. It was you who manipulated that fake Qiao Yingchun behind the scenes and let her enter the Mu family smoothly. You even arranged for her to step into the social circle of the nobles. Her pitch-black eyes fell into the depths of Mu Qingya's rippling eyes. They swayed like two crescents of clear spring water, chilling to the bone. At that moment, she seemed to see that person in the little girl. Cold, elegant, and incomparably arrogant. She humbly crawled at the feet of that person and listened to others telling her that this was the eldest miss of the Long family and the future mistress of the Mu family. That woman's clear and frosty eyes fell on her. At that moment, she felt as if she had fallen into the depths of the dust, so weak that she was even less than an ant. To be honest, she really hated this feeling of having to kneel and look up to others. She hated it very, very much. Mu Qingya's memory flowed slowly with the waves and finally stopped at a certain point. Nanny Qiu bowed to her and whispered, Madam, concubine Shi has already brought her here according to our arrangements. Madame Mu curled her lips and revealed a faint light in the corners of her eyes. Tomorrow, at the banquet at General Zhongli's residence, Mu Qingya stroked a soft strand of hair by her temples. I'm not feeling well tomorrow. Yes, madam. Nanny Qiu smiled faintly and bowed 2 steps back. Then tomorrow, let that idiot take that fake to General Zhongli's residence to meet the nobles in the imperial court. Mu Qingya nodded faintly and said softly, That's good. Mu Qingya looked at the arbor in front of her indifferently. She was lost in thought for a long time and didn't say anything. Her eyes revealed a faint sigh and a faint sadness. All of this is just your guess, Mrs. Mu said softly. How can you prove that I did such a thing? Jojo, if I do this, what good will it do for me? Child, it's not good for your health to think too much. Arbor ignored her and continued, after that, I returned to the Mu family. On the surface, you seem to take care of everything and treat me and the crown prince respectfully. Do you need me to remind you of what you did behind my back? What did I do? Mu Qingya looked at Arbor innocently and couldn't help but laugh at herself. I didn't do anything, okay? That Xiao Xing is one of your people. Arbor coldly said, as soon as I entered the Mu family, you started to make things difficult for me. Crown Princess. Mu Qingya looked helpless. I really didn't know that you still remember Xiao Xing's matter. Of course I remember. She even turned into a zombie. She turned into a zombie and almost attacked my people. Mu Jingfeng. Arbor pointed at the dumbstruck Mu Jingfeng. Mu Jingfeng even tried his best to absolve you, saying that this matter had nothing to do with you. Chapter 4073. But how did a perfectly fine person suddenly turn into a corpse in the woodshed? There's no need to say how many improved potions the Hall Master of Tianyun's Soaring Heavens Hall has, right? Is what she said true? Mu Jingfeng finally regained his senses. His hair was disheveled and covered in blood as he stared at Mu Qingya, who had a knife at her neck. Is what she said true? Of course not. Mu Qingya let out a long sigh. I'm just a weak woman. How can I be the Hall Master of the Heavenly Fortune Club? Jingfeng, we've been husband and wife for so many years. I do hate you for forcing me against my will back then, but all these years, what I've done for you, what I've done for the entire Mu family, what I've sacrificed over 10 years of my youth, what I've done for this family, can't you see it? As Mu Qingya spoke, her eyes flickered with tears, as if she had suffered a great grievance. Her expression was abnormally miserable. However, Mu Jingfeng took a step back and glanced at her with a trembling gaze. He realized that he really couldn't understand this wife of his who had shared a bed with him for so many years. Old master, old madam. Mu Qingya looked at the two elders with tears in her eyes. Even you two believe it? You believe that I'm a member of that evil cult? You believe that I, Mu Qingya, have done anything to let down the Mu family? Old madam heaved a long sigh, and her gaze swept toward Xiao Mu. Xiao, is there a misunderstanding? There's no misunderstanding, Arbor said indifferently. She had never thought that these people from the Mu family would stand by her side, nor did she think that someone from the Mu family would be able to stand by her side. But no matter what, right was right and wrong was wrong. Since she already knew this woman's true colors, how could she not expose her? Mu Qingya, you've indeed pretended very well. You've deceived so many people for so many years. Today, regardless of whether anyone believes me or not, you won't be able to escape death. Arbor said coldly as he looked at her with a sharp gaze. Eldest miss. I believe you. Suddenly, a Mu family disciple with a bandage on his arm spoke up. Eldest young miss, I also believe in you. Another Mu clan disciple nodded heavily and said, There's no need for eldest miss to lie to us. Yes. Eldest miss risked her life to save our Mu family, there's no need for her to lie to us. Ma Shurchen raised her eyebrows slightly and revealed a faint smile. It seemed that these younger generation Mu family disciples were not stupid to the point of being incurable. Mu Xingchen turned to look at his younger sister, then at the group of youths from the Mu family who were still in high spirits even though they were covered in injuries. He couldn't help but reveal a faint smile. Arbor turned around expressionlessly and looked at Mu Qingya. After little Xing turned into a zombie, you cooperated with Nie Yaoguang to spread rumors. They said that monsters appeared in the Mu clan because the crown princess, the source of the disaster, had returned to the divine land. Mu Qingya turned her head slightly and looked coldly at the little crown princess. It's a pity that this rumor was suppressed by me before it could spread. Your plan failed again. Arbor looked coldly at Mu Qingya. After that, you also know what happened to Juxian and Meixian. Chapter 4074. There's no need to deny it. In fact, you've contributed a lot to the entire Mu family all these years. You've taken care of the Mu family from top to bottom, and the entire Mu family's affairs are in your hands. How could you not know the movements of the two girls? Those two girls who wanted to climb into your bed were nominally sent by concubine Sure. But in fact you were the one who added fuel to the fire and watched coldly from the sidelines. You can't get away with all this. But in the end, after the incident, the one who was punished was concubine Sure, who took the blame for you. Sure Huixin is really miserable. Arbor said coldly. From the beginning to the end, she was a chess piece in your hands. She played wherever you wanted her to play. In the end, she was killed by your vicious rotting talisman from a distance. Mu Jingfeng, this fool, even accused me of killing her. How could he know that there should be a talisman hall in Tianyun? I've dealt with a lot of people in your hall. For example, that Black Cat Master. He's from your subordinate Clear Sky sect. In fact, he should be from Tianyun's talisman hall. Mu Qingya looked at Arbor with a smile in her eyes. For a long time, she just looked at her with a smile on her lips. Her eyes were calm, as if at this moment, she hadn't revealed the little girl's hidden identity. Kaidai Pavilion, Zhenhua Workshop, and Despondent Pavilion are all properties left to me by my mother. Is it wrong for me to take them back? Arbor looked at Mu Qingya. That's my mother's dowry. It's my mother's things. It's mine. Mu Qingya's smiling eyes gradually turned cold, and her lips curled into a faint sneer. You were dissatisfied, but you had no choice but to give the property to me. So you sent people to Kaidai Pavilion and set fire to people. You secretly forged my handwriting and tricked Caixio into taking the poison letter to Kaidai Pavilion. Even if the fire didn't kill people, the poison would have ruined Kaidai Pavilion's reputation and made my reputation notorious. But I suddenly came back from the academy. I took control of the situation and made your scheme fail again. You actually hate me for messing up all your plans. Although I came back in time to deal with the Kaidai Pavilion matter, Caixio was injured. The 8 members of the Zhang clan were instigated by you to cause trouble. Although they are detestable, they don't deserve to die. 8 lives were lost just like that in the prison. I admit that you won that time. You're really amazing. The little crown princess walked towards her and stood 3 steps away from her. She looked at her indifferently. I have suspected you 3 times. All 3 times, nothing happened. Can you tell me the truth now? I'm really curious. Arbor looked at her and said, I don't know what I've done to offend you that you can send people after me again and again. Time and time again, you want me to feel like I'm in hell, living a miserable life. In this life, you have no hope of fulfilling your wish. Because you have already fulfilled it in your previous life. Mu Qingya tilted her head slightly, and her cold eyes became colder and colder. Suddenly, her fingers twitched, and she lightly pushed aside the knife against her neck. She then gave Qiao Mu an extremely faint smile. Do you want to know? You'll never know in this life, Mu Qingya said coldly. Protect the hall master, Granny Qiu shouted. Chapter 4075. The disciples of the Heavenly Fate sect rushed toward Arbor and tried their best to protect Mu Qingya and the others as they retreated. From the looks of it, they probably didn't care about anything else and wanted to retreat immediately. Song Lu stood in place in shock, as if she hadn't recovered from the shock of, Madam is the leader of the Heavenly Fate sect, and was pushed to the ground. Before she could stand up, she was stepped on by the disciples of the Heavenly Fate sect. Holding her broken arm, she cried out in pain. The disciples of the Heavenly Fate sect carried the pale-faced Mrs. Hua, Mu Rochin, and the others and retreated as they fought. Countless rays of spiritual qi of various colors collided in the air, making buzzing sounds. Arbor looked coldly at the disciples of the Heavenly Fate sect who were holding other people's families hostage. With a wave of his hand, countless arrows flew down from the roof. The arrows were accurate and powerful. Each arrow pierced through the neck of a disciple of the Heavenly Fate sect, knocking them to the ground and killing them instantly. Mu Qingya said coldly, use them as shields. Mrs. Hua was horrified to find that she had been lifted up in the air, blocking the heads of Mu Qingya and the others. If there were arrows flying down from the sky, they would definitely turn her into a hornet's nest. Mother! Mother. The young masters of the fifth branch were so anxious that they jumped up and raised their swords to charge forward, but they were stopped by the disciples of the Heavenly Fate sect in the front row. Crown Princess, Mu Qingya said coldly. Mu Qingya said coldly, "You don't care about the lives of 20 to 30 women here? Let us leave this place in exchange for these people's lives." Mu Qingya said calmly and elegantly. She didn't have the feeling that she was forced into a desperate situation and had no way out. Even at this very moment, her identity had already been exposed and she was seen clearly from head to toe. She still acted like an elegant and dignified madam. She was calm, and her eyes were cold and indifferent. She didn't give off the slightest feeling of being seen through. She was so calm that Emo Lien and the others couldn't help but look at her in a new light. For an ordinary woman to become the leader of the Heavenly Fate sect, it was definitely not due to luck. She was capable. In fact, except for the fact that this woman had no cultivation, her mind, judgment, and even vision were very shrewd and unique, far better than those women raised in boudoirs. "Let them go," Arbor said coldly. Mu Qingya sneered. "Do you think I'm a fool? Now that I've released her, I'll let you do whatever you want without any cover. You don't have a choice." The young Crown Prince Consort's icy voice weighed down on everyone present, causing their hearts to sink. "If I can't live, then why should I listen to you?" Mu Qingya sneered and pressed the dagger in her hand against Madame Wu's neck. "All of you back off. Retreat to the middle court." Arbor's voice to the Heavenly Fate sect, to the heavens to her to the ground twos to head to the Heavenly Fate sect. "Madam, sex to kill, sex to kills, I've said it before. Today all of you will die here." Arbor interrupted sex words indifferently and said word by word, "No one can leave unscathed after disturbing my mother's sleep." Mu Qingya, who had been as calm as ever, finally cracked her expression. "Are you really so ruthless and decisive? You don't care about their lives at all?" Chapter 4076. Arbor raised her eyebrows and sneered. "You think they can keep their lives after you take them away? Are you naive, or do you think I'm naive?" Xiao Mu's small hand that she had raised clenched slightly. "The people that you have captured will either become targets for you to blackmail the Mu clan with in the future or be modified for your own use. Are you stupid, or do you think I don't know what you're planning?" Arbor put down her little hand and said sternly, "Shoot. Everyone from the Heavenly Fate realm will die here today. Don't leave a single one alive." Mu Qingya's eyes narrowed, and anger finally appeared in her cold eyes. "Protect the Hall Master and retreat." Nanny Chio's roar shook the sky. She used a silver hook to deflect the arrows that were flying toward her. She was about to grab a girl from the Mu family and place her in front of Mu Qingya. Just as she was about to grab a girl from the Mu family, a shrill cry came from the sky. Chio Mama immediately felt a tearing pain in her arm. She looked down and saw that Qing Luan had torn her hand apart with a claw and directly took the miss of the Mu family, who she was pulling, away from the battle. At the same time, 3 phoenixes flew out of the sky. Yes, there were 3 phoenixes. Everyone looked up with a dumbfounded expression. A red, a purple, and a black bird flapped their wings rapidly and swooped down from the sky, scattering the crowd of heavenly kismet cultivators who had gathered together. Madame Hua, Mu Rochin, and the others were caught by the claws of 2 phoenixes. With a rip, a small piece of their sleeve was torn and they were pulled away from the others. Mu Qingya's eyes instantly darkened, and she angrily rebuked, "Don't panic, don't mess up the formation and hold on tight. Screech." In the blink of an eye, the blazing blood phoenix flapped its wings and spat out a line of fire towards the feet of the Heavenly Fate disciples. Nanny Chio grabbed Mu Qingya's arm. Ignoring the fact that her hand was still bleeding, she pulled Mu Qingya 2 steps back and kicked away Song Lu, who was standing in front of her. Then she quickly retreated. "Nanny Chio, madam." "Madam?" Song Lu's face was full of fear. He struggled to get up from the ground and limped forward 2 steps. Suddenly, an arrow pierced through his heart. With a face full of pain and despair, he stretched out his hand in the direction of the 2 people leaving and fell heavily to the ground. She probably never thought that she would die like this. Her eyes were wide open, revealing a hint of unwillingness. Nanny Chio didn't even have time to look at Song Lu. She just shouted, "Protect the hall master and retreat." Beside her, Thorny Rose also recovered from her shock. She swept a glance at Mu Qingya and indifferently curled her lips. She grabbed Mu Jingfeng, who was still in a daze, and giggled. "What, are you dumbfounded? Why aren't you leaving? Are you waiting for them to counterattack?" Now she could see that the little girl was really capable. No matter if it was the divine bird Qing Wan or the 3 divine phoenix beasts, it was already an amazing thing for an ordinary cultivator to have one of them, let alone this girl actually had 4 of them. Not any random Xiozha could contend against him. Without absolute strength and wealth, Tisk, wanting to kill this little girl was probably a fool's dream. Chapter 4077. Not to mention Mu Qingya, who didn't have any cultivation. Even if the hall masters of other halls were here, they would definitely suffer in the hands of this little girl. So a wise man submits to circumstances. It was best to leave quickly and avoid suffering such a great loss. Tao Wei quickly retreated with her people. Although the ordinary heavenly fate disciples were all quite strong, how could they be a match for the well-trained Hades court guards? After shooting a round of arrows from the tall building, they immediately jumped down from the roof in perfect coordination and directly engaged in a purge of the heavenly fate disciples. The 4 divine beasts, Qing Wan, Huofeng, and the other 3 divine beasts, were even faster in their rescue operation. In a matter of minutes, they rescued more than 20 female members of the Mu clan who were originally held captive by the heavenly fate disciples. After Mu Rakan was rescued, her snow-white little face was as pale as a sheet of paper. While Mu Yuanyuan and Mu Lixiang were fighting the enemies, they quickly moved to her side and held her up. They asked with concern, "Rakan, how are you?" I'm fine." Although Mu Rochin and 5th Madam were a little frightened, their complexions were a little unsightly, and their bodies were more or less injured. Compared to the scene they had imagined in their hearts that they would die here today, these small injuries were nothing. "You, go kill the enemies. Don't worry about us," Mu Rakan hurriedly said. They really had to thank the little crown princess for today's matter. Although the little crown princess looked cold and emotionless on the surface, she had already ordered Qing Wan and Huofeng to rescue them when she gave the order to shoot the arrows. The 2 sides fought fiercely. The heavenly fate disciples fell one by one under the counterattacks of the Mu clan disciples and the Hades court guards. Nanny Chio couldn't care too much at this time. Under the protection of a group of people, she protected Mu Qingya and retreated toward the back mountain gate of the Mu clan. "Nanny Chio." Mu Qingya held her blood-stained arm and her eyes moved slightly. "I'm fine, madam." Nanny Chio's face was cold as she said in a deep voice, "These small injuries won't take this old servant's life. Let this old servant escort madam out of here first. If there's anything, let's talk outside." Mu Qingya turned her head and looked out of the crowd. With this glance, she accurately caught the cold gaze of the little crown princess. Between the 2 of them were countless Mu clan and heavenly fate sect disciples who were fighting with all their might. Both sides were fighting very fiercely. However, the young crown prince consort wasn't affected by all this commotion. She stood outside the crowd, her eyes sparkling like snow. Staring at her, Mu Qingya fell into a trance for a moment, as if the little girl was rarely emotional. Just like now, he was coldly looking at you without saying a word. His eyes were incomparably focused. It made one's hair stand on end, and it climbed up from the bottom of their hearts. "You can't escape." Mu Qingya read these words from her cold eyes. The little girl raised her left hand, and a longbow made of ice and snow suddenly fell into her small hand. His eyes were still fixed on Mu Qingya. Drawing the bow and pulling the arrow only took a breath. The profound ice arrow whizzed through the night sky and flew against the wind, suddenly shooting toward Mu Qingya. "Go." Mu Qingya was greatly shocked. She grabbed Nanny Chio's hand and shouted, "Madam, get out of the way." Nanny Chio's old face suddenly flushed red. Chapter 4078. Whoosh! The sound of the arrow piercing through the air broke through the thick night. This arrow seemed to have pierced through the crescent moon in the sky, carrying with it a desolate and austere intent. With a trace of terrifying fury, it shot in front of Mu Qingya like a clap of thunder. There was nowhere left to hide. Granny Chiu pushed Mu Qingya away, her face ashen. She gathered all of her divine power into her arm as fast as she could. A ray of red light shot out from her palm. Flames danced, and her divine power was released, bringing with it a brilliant light in the dark night. Everyone saw the red light form an oval-shaped protective shield, which rushed towards the little girl's arrow. The enchanting red light and the bright silver light collided in a matter of minutes. The little girl's arrow scattered silver-white snowflakes in the air. It pierced through the opponent's protective shield at an extremely fast speed, and it continued to advance without any intention of stopping. All of the Mu family disciples couldn't help but hold their breaths. They saw their eldest Miss Arrow instantly break through Granny Chiu's oval-shaped protective shield. It didn't seem to be exhausted at all, and it shot through the old woman's chest at a speed comparable to that of light. Pfft! Granny Chiu spat out a mouthful of blood. The entire place was in an uproar, accompanied by the thunderous roars of all the youths of the Dark Court guards. "Crown Princess! Crown Princess! Crown Princess!" Prince Mo smirked, and his gaze landed on Arbor with a smile. The little girl looked at Mu Qingya and the others expressionlessly. She raised her hand slightly and said calmly, "Disciples of the heavenly providence go against the heavens. Everyone has the right to punish them. Everyone has the responsibility to eradicate the heavenly providence. Eradicate the heavenly providence. Madam, let's go. Madam, let's go." Granny Chiu pushed Mu Qingya forcefully. In front of them, Thorny Rose had already quickly opened the teleportation talisman formation and stepped into it. Granny Chiu used her last breath to slap Mu Qingya's back and send her into the formation. Arbor's eyes were cold and merciless. With a flick of her finger, countless attack talismans flew out of her small hand and merged into the light and shadow of the teleportation talisman array. Although the transportation glyph array had quickly brought Thorny Rose, Mu Jingfeng, and Mu Qingya away, everyone could still hear several howls of anguish that varied in intensity. Presumably, the people in the formation were more or less injured. Arbor looked coldly in the direction they left and spat out a word, "Chase." Prince Mo's figure flashed and lifted the dying Nanny Chiu. Without waiting for him to speak, Mama Chiu coldly stared at him. Her neck moved slightly, and her head suddenly drooped down. Mo Lien looked down and saw a smear of black blood dripping from the old woman's mouth. It was obvious that she had taken poison to commit suicide. What a loyal and unruly old servant. Arbor coldly said. Then she took out a soul-summoning talisman and lifted the old woman's soul out without another word. After Nanny Chiu's faint soul was lifted out, she couldn't help but shiver when she saw the cold and lonely little girl in front of her. At this time, she was still a bit confused. Seeing Arbor standing in front of her, she was a bit confused. Was she alive or dead? "I'll let you see what will happen to the madam you wholeheartedly protected," Arbor coldly said. "The person I, Arbor, want to kill won't live for long. You definitely won't be able to protect her." Chapter 4079. The little girl's fingers tightened around Granny Chiu's soul. Her eyes were like thousand-year-old ice, cold and distant. "Don't worry. I won't let her die so easily. After all, she owes me. I'm afraid she won't be able to repay me in this lifetime." The little girl stared coldly at Granny Chiu in her hand and said coldly, "In this lifetime, I want her to beg for death." At this moment, the heavenly fate sect's disciples had all been eliminated. Only the Mu family's disciples and the Nether Court guards were left. Everyone was silent. Only the little girl's cold and resolute voice sounded in their ears. It was bone-chilling and indifferent. The pitch-black flames rose behind them and swept away the corpses of the heavenly fate sect's disciples. Even the souls of the heavenly fate sect's disciples were burned clean. Not even their bones were left. Arbor shot out several teleportation talisman arrays. Holding Emolien's hand, he led the group of Nether Court guards and disappeared in front of everyone. The heaven-level teleportation talisman array could teleport up to 500 people at a time. The distance was up to 500 kilometers. One of the Mu family's disciples gritted his teeth and rushed into the teleportation talisman array with his sword. Soon after, 2, 3, 100, 300, 500 Mu family disciples followed in batches and ran over. Mu Xingqian's eyes flickered. He looked back and exchanged glances with the old master. Then he quickly followed. Although the old master was also in a sorry state and covered in blood, there was an indescribable joy in his expression. He watched as the Mu family's juniors rushed into the talisman array without fear of death. The old master suddenly burst into laughter. The great elder, the second elder, and the others beside him also laughed. Although each of them had more or less wounds on their bodies, they were barely holding on at this time. Their bodies were extremely exhausted. However, they had never felt so happy before. There was no other reason. After this battle, the entire Mu family seemed to have been twisted into a rope. Their cohesiveness had reached an unprecedented level that had never been seen before. Whether it was the old master or the elders, they were all very clear. It was the little girl who brought these people together again. It was the little crown princess who reignited the fighting spirit of the Mu family. It reignited the courage and bravery in their bones. Just now, they hadn't said a word, but had followed the figure of the little crown princess as she left. They were all in a sorry state, so tired that they might not even be able to lift their swords. However, the old master and the elders had never felt that the Mu family's juniors were extremely pleasing to the eye like today. Their backs were straight, and their eyes were unwavering. They looked like the descendants of the Mu family. The second elder's smile pulled at the wound at the corner of his mouth. He grimaced in pain and sighed, "I finally understand why Ancestor Zhang must rely on this little girl to be the patriarch." The ancestor was indeed the ancestor. His eyes were indeed sharp and experienced. This was because he had long seen that the Mu family really had to let the young lady be the person in charge in order to restore its former glory and splendor. Only eldest Miss could bear such a heavy responsibility and shoulder the faith and hope of the entire family. At this point, it could be said that the entire Mu family was wholeheartedly convinced by the little stoic. The little stoic naturally didn't know about this change. When she, her husband, and Shengchen led the underworld court guards out of the transportation talisman array, they immediately turned around and gazed coldly behind them. "They're here." The little stoic's lips curled into a sneer. Chapter 4080. Did they think they could slip away from a heaven-grade great talisman master with a transportation talisman formation? Too naive. If it were her in the past, perhaps she really wouldn't have been able to do anything to them. But now, Lord Jojo was already a heaven-grade great talisman master. He knew the flow of talisman power, the control of talisman power, and the depth of talisman power like the back of his hand. She knew what talisman the other party used, how much talisman power they had, the approximate location of the transportation and the distance. After calculating the distance and space, he led all the dark court guards to wait for Mu Qingya and the others at the outskirts. Sure enough, with a flash of light, Thorny Rose was the first to fall out of the transportation talisman formation, spitting out a mouthful of blood. It was obvious that the wave of attack talismans from earlier had caused a series of commotion in the narrow transportation space after falling into the formation, causing everyone to be heavily injured. Arbor stood there with cold eyes and looked at Mu Qingya from a distance. Mu Qingya was sent into the formation by Nanny Chio's palm strike and was also shaken by the attack talismans. She was obviously injured. But the problem was, her complexion actually looked better than Thorny Rose's. Arbor looked her up and down a few times before nodding and saying, "As expected of Soaring Heavens Hall's Hall Master. Even though you don't have cultivation, you still have a lot of defensive talismans and defensive spirit artifacts on you." Mu Qingya covered a bloody wound on her arm and calmly looked up at Arbor. She sighed softly and said, "Jojo, you are indeed powerful." Arbor nodded again. "If I wasn't powerful, I would have been killed by the Clear Sky Sect people you sent on Sikong Planet. I really didn't expect that a woman like you could make Shuntian Prefecture's prefecture lord. Gong Pengcheng, so devoted to you? Arbor looked her up and down curiously. You are a woman without cultivation. What right do you have to do this? I am also very curious. It's good for people to be curious. Mu Qingya smiled faintly. Her expression was distant. But a person's curiosity may not always be satisfied by others. Arbor sneered. When Rowan has been scheming against me and my family since the beginning. Unfortunately, he didn't succeed. After that, Priest Dayu, Fan Shoha, Fan Gu, the three dwarf brothers, let me think, and Old Monkey Brother 2, 10 FA from the Clear Sky sect, there are too many. Arbor sighed. Look, how many people did you send to deal with me, and what did you get in the end? Nothing. You can't deal with me at all. At least in her life, she had never suffered a big loss in the hands of Mu Qingya. Could this be attributed to the misery of his previous life? So that she could gain experience in dealing with enemies? Arbor raised his eyebrows in self-mockery. His eyes flickered, and there was a hint of loneliness in them. But there aren't so many wise in this world. Mu Qingya sighed. Just like you. I also want to know why you seem to be blessed by God. You seem to be able to see through my intentions, my actions, and the people I send every time. They seem to be useless to you. Arbor was taken aback. A faint, cold, and desolate smile slowly blossomed on his lips. What you said makes some sense. Who doesn't have a little bit of secret on them? Mu Qingya. Although you have no cultivation, you have a special ability, right? I'm so sleepy that I want to smash my computer. Chapter 4081. Mu Qingya smiled faintly at the little girl and said faintly, I'm really curious about you now. Look at you. You're just a little girl. How can you be so capable? You're indeed not an ordinary person. Mu Qingya smiled and raised her hand to tidy up her slightly messy hair. When you returned to the Mu family, I couldn't make you disappear from the family immediately. From then on I lost. At that time, you asked me for the management rights of the Kaidai Pavilion, the Despondent Pavilion, and the Precious Painting Workshop. Of course, you didn't do anything wrong. These were originally your mother's businesses. But was I wrong? All these years, I've been taking care of those shops. I made them prosper, and that's why they're where they are today. You're great. The moment you came back, you stretched out your hand and completely overruled all my efforts over the years. Tell me, how annoying are you, child? Mu Qingya sighed softly and slowly pushed away the two heavenly fate disciples who were protecting her. Although I'm unwilling, I can only give them away. I originally thought that there would be a process for you to take over these businesses, and it would be chaotic for a while. But I didn't expect that you would really make me look at you in a different light. You've done well. You've managed the businesses left behind by your mother in an orderly manner. Because of the existence of the holy rice and the beautifying pill, they're even more popular than when I was managing them before. You cultivators are so unscrupulous. Mu Qingya let out a long sigh, a trace of helplessness appearing between her brows. No matter how hard an ordinary person tries to catch up, no matter how hard they work, you only need to use a little trick to leave us far behind, and we'll never see the end of it. I'm just wondering if you're really that lucky. If I use a little trick, will you be unlucky? Mu Qingya suddenly laughed. Her laughter was gentle and sweet, and a faint light flowed in the bottom of her eyes. It's a pity that Nanny Zhang found a group of idiots and failed to bring you down. I have to send Nanny Chiu to deal with the aftermath personally. When the Crown Princess took over the Kaidai veranda, not only did she manage the business well, she even made the reputation of the Kaidai veranda and the Precious Painting Workshop soar in just a few days. What does that mean? Mu Qingya laughed at herself. It means that you're far more capable than me. To think that I boasted about being smart all my life, but I didn't expect that in the end, I couldn't even defeat a little girl. Are you really someone from this era? Mu Qingya's gaze was focused as she stared at Xiao Mu. She took a step forward, her long plain dress swaying slightly in the wind. Could it be that I made a mistake from the start? Mu Qingya looked deeply at the young lady in front of her. Her words were long and leisurely, with a hint of softness at the end. Crown Princess, where did you come from? Me. The little crown princess looked at her with an indifferent expression. Her gaze was extremely cold, as if she was looking at a cold corpse. I'm a malicious spirit that climbed up from a mountain of corpses, a sea of blood, and the depths of hell. I'm here specifically to take your life. Even though Mu Qingya was bold and meticulous, her heart still trembled in fright at the young crown prince consort's unperturbed and cold expression. Ha! Mu Qingya suddenly laughed out loud. Chapter 4082. Pursing her red lips, Mu Qingya looked at Arbor and nodded with a smile. She stretched out a slender finger and pointed in Arbor's direction. Crown Princess, you're definitely the most interesting person I've ever seen in my life. You're also very interesting, Arbor said coldly. Your special ability is in your eyes, right? The little crown princess stretched out her finger and drew a curve in front of her eyes. Your eyes can monitor me from afar, right? Isn't that right? Why do you say that, crown princess? That day, I put the magic eye on you. You knew that I was already suspecting you, Arbor said indifferently. You deliberately put on a show to confuse me. It was that show where you pretended to worship my mother in the secret chamber and cursed the dragon to keep his promise. It made me feel that you should be standing by my side. Mu Qingya smiled but didn't say anything. The scene of that day flashed through his mind. When she activated her special ability and found that the little girl had thrown a magic eye on her to monitor her, she already had a plan in mind. At that time, she patted Nanny Chio's hand and drew the word, memorial, on her palm. Nanny Chio had worked with her for many years, and they had worked together many times in the sacrificial scene for Long Chun. Naturally, she could understand what she meant immediately. Thus, Nanny Chio immediately cooperated with her and put on another sacrificial scene. They worked well together and truly bewitched the little crown princess. When they went out, the maid who splashed the water had been arranged early in the morning. The magic eye was naturally useless when it got wet. After changing out of the wet clothes and burning them, they could safely survive this crisis. Mu Qingya was very attentive. After this incident, she became more respectful and obedient to the little crown princess. One couldn't find any fault with her at all. You're indeed very capable, very capable. Xiao Mu nodded dryly. But no matter how perfect a person is, they will still reveal their flaws in the end. No one is perfect, Arbor glanced at her and said, your attitude towards Mu Rochuan makes me very puzzled. If she could be so cruel to her own daughter, how could she be so attentive to the daughter of her good sister? You actually hate my mother, don't you? I didn't. You do. Arbor interrupted her coldly. My mother's talent is outstanding and her status is noble. You don't have these. Ah. Mu Qingya couldn't help but sneer. Do you think I'm such a shallow person? Would you hate her for a noble status and an illusory talent? Yes. The young crown prince consort nodded in full agreement. Mu Qingya's face instantly became twisted and ferocious. Everyone behind him was speechless. If they were Mu Qingya, they would probably be angered to death by the little crown princess's indifferent attitude. Unfortunately, these are all things you don't have. You should try very hard to get them, but in this lifetime it's probably impossible. Shut up. Mu Qingya clenched her fists and yelled at him. What do you know? Don't judge others rashly with a self-righteous tone. You did so much for your mother, and it's not wrong. But am I wrong? What's wrong with me? We're just in different positions. Actually, we're not wrong. Chapter 4083. Different standpoints? Different standpoints. Arbor snickered. I, Arbor, will not be like a mad dog that bites others for generations to come just because we have different standpoints. Ask yourself honestly. From Sikong Planet to Shuntian Prefecture and then to the Divine Province. How many times have you dealt with me along the way? You instigated Shuntian Prefecture's Prefecture Lord, Gung Pengcheng, to deal with me when I was 7 years old on Sikong Planet in the lower star domain. You arranged for Wen Rowan to interfere with my life and my family's lives with the intention of controlling my life and wanting me to live a life worse than death? All of these schemes suddenly collapsed after I met Emolien and joined the Holy Water sect. You're done for. Xiao Mu held a black ferrule horizontally in her hand as she stared coldly at Mu Qingya. The countless pursuits and schemes that followed were merely because you wanted to make a comeback. You completely failed. You succeeded in your previous life. Arbor coldly looked at her. You can no longer control my life. You made me extremely miserable in my previous life. How I want to live and how I want to walk is entirely up to me to control my own future. How much blood and tears have I paid for this? In her previous life, she didn't even know that she was originally a daughter of the Mu family. She didn't know that this world was so vast. She also didn't know that her biological father's second wife used so many disgusting and despicable methods to deal with her, to prevent her from regaining her original identity and to prevent her from setting foot on the fertile land of the 3 provinces continents. Right now, she even suspected that this Mu Qingya was a psychopath with a twisted mind. Otherwise, how could she be so at ease and use so many schemes against a little girl who was only 7 years old? Just what kind of enmity and grievance did she have to hate her own mother, Long Chuyun, so much? You will never know. For a person who is used to freedom, equality, and openness, what kind of life is the most torturous? You won, Arbor. Mu Qingya heaved a sigh of relief. The winner takes all. I, Mu Qingya, have nothing to say. I'm just curious. You're a ghost from hell. How far can you go in this life? The icy snow mountain is bone-chilling. In the dim yellow sea of fire, the raging flames burn the heart. Crown Princess, isn't the future scary? I will accompany her no matter how far she goes. You don't have to worry. Emolien replied coldly. She moved slightly to Arbor's side and reached out to hold her bone-chilling hand. A sea of fire and a snow mountain, what is there to fear? If we work together, all difficulties will be easily solved. The little Crown Princess raised her head and looked into his smiling eyes. Her heart suddenly softened. Mu Qingya suddenly laughed heartily. She looked gently at Arbor and said, Child, you're much luckier than your mother. I know you hate me and want me to die right now. But I still have a lot of things to do. At least, I won't die today. Mu Qingya pursed her lips and smiled confidently. There are only a handful of heaven-level great talisman masters in the 3 provinces. You're really impressive. Mu Qingya sighed softly. Chapter 4084. Child, what do you think of this world? Mu Qingya raised her hands and pointed at the boundless sky, her gaze softly watching Arbor. Do you think that talent is predestined and that no one can change it? Are people born into noble families truly rich and powerful, and are favored by the heavens and earth? No. Mu Qingya looked at them firmly. Everything is possible in this world. Everything can be changed. This is the meaning of the heavenly fortune's existence. Since the heavenly Tao can't be fair, just, and free, then let us, the heavenly fortune, create these. We are ordinary people, but we weren't ordinary from birth. Mu Qingya faintly stared at the little Crown Princess and resolutely said, What we don't have, we can create with our own hands. We can strive for it. Who said that we must be determined to struggle for survival at the lowest level of society our entire lives? What's there to be afraid of if we don't have status? We can create the heavenly fortune and let it rule this entire world. What's there to be afraid of if we don't have talent? We can create talent. Let ourselves become people above others. We don't need to be oppressed by the unfairness of this world anymore. The heavenly fortune is the hope of all of us ordinary and poor people. No matter how you noble families suppress it, how you exterminate it, what should rise will always rise. What should succeed will definitely succeed in the end. Chila Chila. After Mu Qingya finished speaking, she suddenly discovered that she, Thorn Wei, and Mu Jingfeng had constructed confinement talisman arrays around them. At this time, talisman power was slightly flowing, and if one's fingers accidentally touched it, they would be bounced back by a vast and mighty force, making chi-chi sounds. Arbor raised her eyebrows. She was really becoming more and more curious about this Mu Qingya now. In this kind of situation, Mu Qingya actually expressed her opinion at length, looking as if she had a card up her sleeve that she could definitely escape. What did she rely on? Was it years of planning and strategizing? Or was it her hot-bloodedness at this moment? Arbor clenched the ferrule in her hand, her cold eyes locking onto Mu Qingya. I've heard enough of your nonsense. Now, are you ready? Are you ready to die? Mu Qingya. Arbor leaped into the air with a whoosh, and a fierce gust of wind blew her clothes and hair up. Mu Qingya's expression remained unchanged, but beside her, Thorny Rose and Mu Jingfeng's pupils could not help but shrink. Hall Master. Thorny Rose turned to look at Mu Qingya, cold sweat dripping down her forehead. Right now, they were surrounded by hundreds of underworld court guards and hundreds of Mu family disciples. With the young crown princess and His Highness the Crown Prince blocking the way in front and so many soldiers blocking the way behind, even if he used the transportation glyph formation again, he might not be able to escape the control of the young crown princess, a heaven-level great glyph master. Arbor, don't be too confident. Mu Qingya suddenly took something out of her sleeve. It was a jade talisman that was emitting a purple light. Suddenly, it broke through the confinement talisman formation around him and shot into the air, emitting a faint purple light. Xiao Mu narrowed her severe eyes as she stared icily at Mu Qingya. In an instant, a cloud-like staircase descended from the clouds, extending all the way to Mu Qingya. Stairway to Heaven Talisman? Arbor's gaze was slightly startled as he muttered. Then he heard a gust of wind brushing past his ears. A pitch-black tongue of flame extended with the wind. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.